Good morning to members and officers and members of the public on 25th of January 2022 for the Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee. Could I ask if there are any apologies, Ms Watson?
Yes, Chairman, we've got apologies today from Councillors Andy Canning and Bill Trite.
Thank you. Members, if I could do the roll call now. Councillor Andrews?
Present.
Councillor Brown? Councillor Heatley?
Morning, Chair, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Roberts?
Good morning, Chairman. Present and correct.
Thank you. Councillor Shortell?
Good morning, Chairman. Present and correct.
Thank you. Councillor Took?
Morning, Chairman, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Turner? Okay, if I move on to the officers attending for the overall agenda, I have Mr John Selgren, Executive Director of Place, Mr Aidan Dunn, Executive Director for Corporate Development, Mr Jonathan Mayer, the Corporate Director for Legal and Democratic, Ms Lindsay Watson, Senior Democratic Services Officer, and Mr George Dare is the producer for the meeting this morning. Other officers will be introduced as required during the meeting. From the Chairman's statement for virtual committee meetings, in the light of the situation with COVID-19 case rates, Dorset Council's Chief Executive Matt Prosser has exercised his delegated powers to continue to hold virtual informal committee meetings. Where a decision is required, committee members will express a minded to decision in respect of the recommendations set out in the officer reports, with decisions being taken under officer delegated authority in the light of minded to decisions expressed by members in the virtual meetings. Any decisions or recommendations required will be confirmed by the appropriate officer at the conclusion of the committee's debate on an agenda item. So members, if we can move to agenda item 2, are there any, if we can move to agenda item 1, I need an appointment of a vice chairman. Councillor Took, you've agreed to be vice chairman. Could I have a seconder on that, please?
I'm happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. So I move to agenda item 2. Any declarations of interest, members? Okay, if you do have a declaration that you realise when we come to that item, can you please make it known? Councillor Took, thank you for being my vice chairman. There are no chairman's updates at agenda item 3. And the agenda item 4, public participation. Do we have any questions from the public, Ms Watson?
No questions from the public for this meeting.
Thank you. Agenda item 5, questions from members. Do we have any questions from members, Ms Watson?
No questions from members for this meeting.
Thank you. So I've moved to agenda item 6, information compliance. The recommendation is to note the improved position on the freedom of information request compliance and note the actions being taken to improve compliance with subject access requests, known as SARS. I'm presented and I have Mark Eyre, Service Manager for Assurance. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Committee. So as the Chair just mentioned, I'm Mark Eyre. I'm the Service Manager for Assurance, and that includes as one of my service functions, information compliance. So myself and James Fisher, who's our Council's Data Protection Officer, attended the September committee to report on actions that were being taken to help improve compliance on information request response timescales. So we're talking really there about freedom of information requests and subject access requests, or SARS. At that meeting, it was noted that we were working with services to improve compliance, but it was too early to look at the results of the actions that have been put in place. But now with this report, we're in a better position to provide you with an update. So first of all, if I focus in on the freedom of information requests element of it, the Information Commissioner's Office guidance for compliance is 20 working days. This has been quite difficult to achieve, particularly during the COVID response, where there was significant pressure on services. There's a chart included at 2.1 of the report that shows compliance across each of our directorates on a monthly basis. If it's showing as green, that means that we've managed to achieve 90% or plus compliance. 80 to 89% is shown as amber, and anything below 80% is identified as red. We've been working really closely with services and each of the management teams to promote the importance of meeting these statutory timescales. I think it's fair to say when you look at that chart, there's still a few blips in that data, but what you will see is that more recent reporting overall for Dorset Council has improved. So overall, in the last month, we're showing as green, and actually in most cases, amber reporting is pretty close to that 90% compliance figure. So we will continue to monitor it, but certainly that looks like it is moving in the right direction. In terms of subject access requests, that has remained quite stubbornly red. So just as a quick reminder, what subject access requests are, that's where an individual requests copies of information that is held about them by an organisation. So the vast majority of requests that we receive are for children's services, and they are really labour-intensive processes, require a lot of redaction due to the sensitivity of the documents. We've now have a dedicated number of staff working within children's services that are purely focused on these SARs, and these will transfer across to my own information compliance team next month. The benefit of this is that it enables far closer working with the new SARs team and experienced members of my own information compliance team. And it's also an opportunity for us to review within the team how we can look to process so how to improve that process more efficiently to get a better delivery service. So we will have 2 full-time equivalents transferring across to information compliance, but in itself, I think as we discussed when we took the paper back in September, that's not a sufficient number of full-time equivalents to be able to meet the full demand of subject access requests. We estimate that to be in total around 3.2 full-time equivalents worth of work. So what we're therefore currently doing is we're outsourcing large requests to an external company in addition to any requests that exceed our internal capacity. There's a table at 3.8 that highlights that we estimate this would be a far more efficient and cost-effective option actually, rather than further recruitment, and it provides more flexibility. And I think a lot of that is because the way that the companies are set up, they have really good sort of redaction software which enables the process to be delivered in a more efficient manner. So I do not anticipate we're going to see a sort of a real improvement to that performance overnight, but mainly because we still have a backlog that we need to work through. But I am confident that this is a really positive way forward, and over coming months we will see that compliance rate improve. The final point I was going to make before I open it up to any questions was that we discussed a little bit at the September meeting. The committee were questioning whether the current key performance indicators that we're using were that effective. I think the main reason being that whilst they identify if a request is overdue, it doesn't distinguish between 1 day overdue and significant areas of non-compliance. So we've not yet actually changed that key performance indicator, but to give you a bit of a feel for that, the chart at 3.5 for subject access requests does show more clearly the extent of time that some of the subject access requests are overdue. So hopefully that gives a good run through the report. But if I stop talking at that point and perhaps open it up to questions, Chair. So you're on mute, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Eyre. That was a really good report. I'll go to the portfolio holder first, Councillor Flower, if he had anything he wishes to add at this point in time.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, Mark's covered the subject extremely well. What I would say is he and I have been in exchange of email because I saw this item, it's an important item. I saw it was on the agenda a week or so ago, and I wanted to be reassured that we were dealing with the topic as we should do. And I'm content that half the battle with having a problem is knowing what it is and coming up with a way of dealing with it. And I believe that's exactly what is set out this morning, Chairman. And it isn't perfect, and there's still work to be done. But I'm reasonably content that if Mark is able to roll out what he's described to you to the committee this morning, I think we will see a sustained improvement, and we'll get to the point where we start getting back in line with our timelines that we want to achieve, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I do appreciate there's been a lot of discussion behind the scenes with the officers and various departments to try and bring this plan into place. Is there any non-committee member that wished to ask a question or speak at this point? Otherwise, I'm going to move to the committee. Got nothing in the chat box. So my first committee speaker is Councillor Roberts.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mark. A couple of points, really, which are sort of questions. I'm glad to see that the duration in the children's service ones, that there's only 2 that are over 12 months. But do we get what I would describe as vexatious freedom of information, and regular ones from similar sources? And my other question is on the outsourcing, where you mentioned they have a very good software. Is that software within the amount we pay them? Would it be possible to have that software and operate it ourselves, or have you looked at that? So 2 points, really. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Eyre.
Thank you very much. If I pick up the one around freedom of information first of all, and vexatious, it is quite difficult to be able to demonstrate that a freedom of information request is vexatious. So from an information compliance officer perspective, it's quite a high bar to go across, but we will have a number of people that make very regular freedom of information requests. If that answers that.
Yeah, I suspected that was the case, yes.
In terms of the second point around outsourcing, so one of the things that when I mentioned that we are looking at ways to try and make the service more efficient, one of the areas that we are looking at is about whether we can actually improve the redaction software that could be used to make some of the process internally more effective. So we're not there yet, but that's certainly one of the things we are currently exploring.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Roberts. Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Gray, who's not actually on the committee, but he had connection issues and couldn't get his request in quick enough, so I'm prepared to take Councillor Gray's question.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Mark. I just wanted to ask you a question about 3.6. I'm just testing my understanding. So you have 1.5 FTEs at the moment, an agreement to go to 2. So the 2 FTEs plus the external still won't achieve the 3.2 FTEs that you think will be needed to hit the numbers. So you've said in the report, still not enabled to meet all requests. So if we're moving from 1.5 to 2 plus the additional support, why are we not doing that to meet rather than not meet? I guess is my question.
Thank you very much. Okay, if I answer that, Chair.
Certainly.
So it may be the way I've worded it, but essentially we see that the equivalent of 3.2 FTEs will be sufficient moving forward based on what we've looked at with historic data. What we've got sat in the background, though, it's due to the fact that we haven't had that capacity right for quite some period of time, is a backlog of cases. So we will need to work through that backlog. So that's really why it's going to take that period of time for us to be more comfortable with our compliance rates. But certainly we would hope that with the 2 full-time equivalents and that outsourcing arrangement, that we will within a good period of time be at a better position in terms of our compliance rates.
Okay.
Do you wish to come back, Councillor Gray?
Well, I was looking for something a bit more definitive, but that's I'm a bit miffed as to, if we've got 2 FTEs plus we're outsourcing maybe some of the more difficult cases, and I understand the complexity issue. When will we be back? When we'll be in a position to hit the service numbers, particularly in the children's area, because that's read for quite some time on and off.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Did you wish to say anything further, Mr. Eyre?
Probably not really anything to add at the moment, but I mean, obviously more than happy to come back with the committee in a period in the future to hopefully be able to demonstrate that we are closer to meeting those compliance rates. If that's good, Chair.
Yeah, I think when we get to the debate part of it, I think that probably will be a request from the committee that we have an ongoing overview of this. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Councillor Gray. Okay, if I can now move to Councillor Heatley.
Thank you, Chair. couple of questions. First of all, on freedom of information requests, the 20 days is a statutory time imposed on us. The 90% target, where does that come from? Is it one we've set ourselves, or is it externally set for us?
That is the guidance from the information compliance officer. So that would be what the ICO would see as being our target. So
that's what they'd expect you to.
Yeah.
Right. So it is externally imposed. Right. I mean, and they impose it on the whole organisation.
They do indeed. So that would be a target for all local authorities to try and meet that 90%.
Yeah, but I think I'm sort of struggling to get to the point that in November the organisation as a whole has passed this external test.
That is right. That's the first time for some while where we've actually had a total green reporting, albeit we've been fairly close to that target number on a number of occasions.
Okay, thank you. My second question is about the subject access requests, and it probably betrays total ignorance of how the system works. But having done something vaguely like this in my life, how difficult or easy it is to answer the questions you are asked often depends on the way the records have been kept in the first place. Is that an issue? Is that an area where maybe we can improve what we're doing or change what we're doing?
Thank you. So we are actually having a look with our colleagues in the information management team and the records management unit about ways of actually improving things there. But I think essentially the real big issue has been one around capacity, to be fair, and it's because for each subject access request, you're not only having to have one person look through what can be a fairly sort of tome of documentation, you've also then got to have that secondary person going through and reviewing that to make sure that you're confident that nothing has been released that shouldn't be. So it's quite an onerous redaction process more than anything.
Right. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Heatley. We can now move to Councillor Took.
Thanks, Chair. The table at 1.4 does spot around quite remarkably. And I note that in the text it says you received between 100 and 150 requests, which is a 50% difference in the number of requests. And I guess the number of requests can have an effect on, given that you've got a fixed number of bodies to answer them. So is there a relationship between red, amber and green response times and what the actual number of requests were in those particular periods?
I think that's a really fair question, and it will sometimes have that. I mean, the freedom of information request can be prompted by a whole number of things. So, for instance, if you get particular national or local headlines on particular subject matters, that can potentially promote a number of freedom of information requests coming through on a particular subject matter, which can put particular pressure on individual services. So from the way that the process is managed, the team that works within my service, the information compliance team, that's largely facilitating the process. The actual collation of the information will sit within individual services. So what you'll find there is particular pressure on particular services at particular times, if that makes sense, Councillor Took.
Okay, thank you. Given this variability, it's going to be quite difficult to actually assess how many bodies you're going to need to answer properly. Is the contracted out element, is there flexibility on that so that you can call in more resources or leave out some resources as required, so that you're taking advantage of outsourcing, so that rather than paying for full-time employees, you're paying as required for extra assistance.
Yeah, that's certainly one of the benefits of that outsourcing arrangement, is that it will be down to us really as an organisation how much we put out to that company. So if we've got, I mean, the way that we are running it is if we get particularly large requests, those will go out to that company. But also we've got the flexibility that if we're getting particular pressures on the internal team, we can push more stuff out to that company as well. So it certainly provides more flexibility than fixed numbers of staffing. And I can't remember exactly what number it is within the report, but we've included a table within there which shows over the years how the number of subject active requests have changed, and certainly over recent years it has more than doubled. It's something we are beginning to still sort of seeing that increase in figures. So again, that flexibility, that's one of the benefits of that outsourcing arrangement. It does give us that flexibility.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute again. It was 3.4, Mr. Eyre, yeah, the table you're referring to.
Thank you.
Is that all your questions, Councillor Took?
Yeah, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I agree with Councillor Took that table at 2.1 is extremely volatile and is a little bit disappointing. The volatility of it, and I understand the reasoning behind that. We've gone at times from red straight to green, and from green to red. We would have expected going from red, amber, green would be nice in a perfect world, but we're obviously not there yet. And I just wondered, certainly I take it a lot of this pressures would have been around COVID, and particularly with the children's over this end, and the children being out of school and having their lives completely disrupted and turned upside down. But how much of this, as we've already alluded to earlier in the report, is down to sufficient officer numbers to do the work?
So I think, Joe, if we really differentiate between the two types of information requests, so the subject access requests, the ones around where people are requesting for personal information about themselves, that is the area where we're looking where we're using that outsourced company. In terms of freedom of information requests, that is all internally delivered, but it will be primarily the information is gathered within the service area itself. So if it's as an example, if we're talking about a highways related freedom of information request, that information request goes to highways to actually deliver it. So in terms of the question about the how volatile some of those figures can be, that will often relate to, as an example, particular issues that have met national or local press on a particular subject matter may generate a lot of interest, which mean that we get, for instance, a whole host of highways ones, which puts pressure on the highways team. Keeping with that same example, that is why it tends to be a little bit more volatile. You can have a small number of FOIs within that one service, or you can have a number on a very similar theme.
Yeah, which it's interesting that you related to the fact that what could be going on can generate significant more requests coming in, because it takes me to another question, which are officers working with our communications team to get information into the public domain in order to reduce the number of FOI requests that come to the council. And it's all about communication, isn't it? And often if we can improve that communication, then we'll hopefully reduce the number of FOI requests that come in, which won't impact so much on our officer resource. So how much work is being done by the communications team to get that information out there?
I mean, at the moment, what we're doing, Chair, is we're working, rather than working at this point in time with the communications team, we're more working with the services to look at what the common themes are that we're getting through with a freedom of information request, and to what extent we can make some of that information, whether it's right that some of that is more transparently available in the early stages. So we're doing a bit of work at the moment with children's in particular in relation to that. If depending on how that bit of work goes, would then look to roll that out more thoroughly with other parts of the council.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. My next speaker is Councillor Shortell.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I just wanted to ask the question regarding freedom of information requests from individuals who are regularly applying for information on a vexatious or harassing cause, whether each of their contacts, which may be even on a weekly basis or even more often, is treated as individual requests, or are they separated and included in those charts on 2.1?
Thank you. It will depend. If they're closely linked, they will relate to the same freedom of information request. If it's of a different nature, then it will be classed as a separate one. It's quite a tricky one when you get into this issue of vexatious nature. I mean, there are guidance issued by the Information Compliance Officer of how you can determine some to be vexatious, but it is a very high bar to have to get over. Does that answer your question?
Well, it does. Through personal experience, I'm having a particular individual who are contacting councillors on a regular basis, and have actually now been diverted to a single point of contact at the council. But that doesn't prevent them from changing their email address and continuing to target individuals, and in particular using freedom of information requests just to be awkward, really. So I just wanted to know if each of those requests actually are a separate entry onto our total.
Yeah. So sometimes they will be, sometimes they won't. It will very much depend. And we have a paper coming up a bit later on the agenda on the complaints service, and we do note that there'd be a lot of commonality between a number of the complaints that come through and a number of the freedom of information requests. You mentioned about single points of contact. That will equally apply to individuals that are submitting freedom of information requests. But as I say, it will, regardless of whether that single point of contact arrangement is in place, we will, in most cases, still have to respond to that freedom of information request.
Oh, that's fine. Okay. Well, yeah, that answers my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Shortell. The next speaker is Councillor Roberts.
Yeah, Mark, mine's similar, but on a slightly different vein. As councillors and another committee I'm on, we get an awful lot of almost identical questions, but from different people, often within a similar organisation, and maybe one word is changed. And are you aware that you get this? I mean, there is a particular reference at the moment to climate change, and I'm sure other councillors receive similar. Do you get almost identical requests from a whole different lot of people, i.e. they've used the same format?
You certainly can get that, and I think that is one of the areas where things can, in those sorts of instances, be more transparently published to make sure that the information is more readily available for other members of the public. We're currently in the process of rolling out some software. It's not quite up and running yet, but that will mean that any freedom of information requests that are submitted will be available for members of the public to actually access and read. So at the moment, you may find that some of these will come in as repeat freedom of information requests. In future, we would immediately be able to direct people to where it is already currently hosted.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shortell. Councillor Heatley.
Yes, I'd just like to say something about vexatious freedom of information requests. Perhaps because I've been nearer the other side of this, although I've never made one myself, I do have quite a lot of inquisitive friends. I think that very often the motivation is that they think that something is being hidden from them and they want to get to it. And so I really commend this policy of more general openness as a way of heading this kind of thing off. I think the motivation is so often a distrust rather than anything else. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Heatley.
I think Councillor Heatley is right there, and I don't completely agree. The more transparent we can have, more transparency we can have with that information is the better. So we're moving in that direction, but there's obviously still some work to be done.
Yeah. Mr. Eyre, can I just take you to page 9 at 2.3 in the report, where the committee had queried about the current Freedom of Information Key Performance Indicator. What was the most effective way to measure the compliance performance? And obviously, you as officers have got some concern around that as well. Could you just put a bit more flesh on the bones as to what is being done to review how the KPI is being reported? You mentioned a different way of reporting it to the directorates.
Yeah, so what we do with the when we're reporting it to the directorate, so they'll still have the KPI as you see it now, but each of the directorate management teams will have a schedule of those individual freedom of information requests that are not compliant with that timescale, what the information request relates to, and how long overdue it is. So anything that's significantly overdue it will be quite clearly set out within that report.
Okay. Yeah, so we see that in the table in 3.5.
So certainly 3. Sorry, just to refer to 3.5. Make sure I'm on the right bit. But yeah, so 3.5 shows that sort of approach from a subject access request sort of perspective. I guess what the report that the director management team's seeing is pretty much the same as that table, but for freedom of information requests, but more on an individual request basis rather than summarised.
Okay, I got you. My last one would be just throwing this out there that at 3.1 and 3.2 on page 9 and 10, referring to that, could some of the subject access requests be accommodated through direct phone consultations involving pre-arranged phone or face-to-face appointments, negating the need for hard or electric copy redacting of documents? Could that speed up the process? Is that a possible avenue of dealing with this?
It certainly is, and it's one of the areas that the Children's Services colleagues are looking at. So at the moment, you'll get a subject access request come through. What Children's are looking at is that initial discussion with the customer can sometimes identify that firstly they may not need any of the information. It could be something that could be verbally dealt with, or in some cases they may not want a full history of it. There may be particular things that are causing them some concern. So that is one of what I've referenced about areas that we can look at to make the process more efficient. That is one of those. Can we front end some of that process better than we currently do?
Okay, thank you. Okay, I've got no other questions from the committee members, so if we can move into the debate. So is there any member that wish to say anything within the debate phase of this agenda item? No. If I can take it that further action being taken 3.6 to 3.8 and certainly through to 3.9 to 3.12, can I take it the committee are happy with the work being done and the plan that's being put in place? It seems to me that the officers are really getting a grip of this now. Obviously, as Mr. Eyre said, it's not an overnight fix. It's going to take time to get through that backlog. But is the committee content as we note this report?
Content, Chair.
Yeah. Okay, I'll take that.
Yes, fine. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Chair.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Eyre, and good luck with all the work you're doing.
Sorry, Chairman, it's Lindsay, Democratic Services. I just noticed that Councillor Took has put a request to speak in the chat bar.
Beg your pardon, Councillor Took.
Thanks. I'm not sure if this is the right place to mention it, but we did have a data breach discussion at the last meeting, which I don't think we've had an answer to. Would that fall within this area, or does it come somewhere else?
I think we'll take care of that further in the committee agenda.
Okay.
The corporate complaints team annual report.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
We'll look at it there.
Chair, I mean, it certainly, rather than falling within the complaints team, it does fall within the information compliance team.
Okay.
I don't have the information on me of that particular data breach that was discussed right now, but I can certainly come back a bit later on in the meeting with that information if that is helpful. But I think it's probably just sort of worth noting that we will, as sort of an organisation of Dorset size, we will have a number of data breaches periodically some of which will be reportable through to the Information Commissioner's Office. Others will not need to be submitted through. The one that was discussed last time, I can't remember the detail off the top of my head. It was identified as a amber level one rather than a red level one. So whilst it was submitted through to the Information Commissioner's Office, it was not seen as being a significant data breach as such. But if the committee can bear with me with that one, I'll come back a little bit later on and update you if I may.
Yeah, I think what was flagged up, as Councillor Tucker picked up on it previously, was that on our dashboard there was no actual information with that data breach. So we didn't know what it was or how severe it was. Yeah, no, that's a fair point, Chair, and certainly one of the things we're looking at is improving the commentary that supports that particular key performance indicator to make sure that there is some clearer information as to what it actually relates to. Okay, you happy with that, Councillor Tuck?
That would be fine if we can get that. It was exactly that. It was there's a data breach. Well, have we just compromised the entire organisation, or is it something extraordinarily trivial? And it's just how do we differentiate that? I wasn't aware that the red, amber, green flagging was a measure of severity. I thought it was more a measure of the numbers.
It's a mix of both, actually. So if we get a number of breaches, it will be identified as a red, but also if we've got one really significant one, that would also be reported as red, and that's left at the discretion of the data protection officer to determine the extent of that breach and its rating that sits alongside it.
Okay, I think maybe there is a difference. You can have 200 very trivial ones, or one very serious one where the whole organisation has been compromised. And I think we need to flag, if there were, say, 10 data breaches altogether, that should be red because that's an awful lot. But maybe there's a double red in there because one of those was extremely serious. We need some way of differentiating that.
And I think certainly that's where that improved commentary would certainly assist, wouldn't it? Giving you that clear idea of whether you've got a particular service area that's had a number of issues, or whether you've got a particular significant breach and what is actually happening to ensure that breach doesn't happen again.
Yeah, just coming back to clarity and transparency.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Tuck. Thank you, Mr. Ray. If you can pass on Scrutiny's thanks to your officer team for all the work you're doing. And it looks like you're moving in the right direction. Can I also ask that obviously we'll have this back to Scrutiny at some point in the future, so we can give an overview on it.
Certainly can. And thanks so much to the committee for the questioning and input. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, members, if we move on to agenda item 7, post-scrutiny review of plans for summer 2021 tourism in Dorset. And I believe I've got Mr. Jack Wilshire to report.
Thank you, Chair.
Morning.
Good morning. Thank you. The paper before you provides an overview of Dorset Council's response to the additional visitor demand seen in 2021. The paper also reviews some of the issues and incidents related to the additional visitor demand we saw in 2020. Sadly, in 2020, we saw that some visitors didn't display the sorts of behaviours we expect to see from people who come to enjoy our unique tourist areas. Images like the helicopters landing on the beach at Durdledore and the destruction of Heathland at Wareham caused by an uncontrolled barbecue, they will stay with many of us for a long time. Going into the peak tourist season for 2021, it was clear that we were likely to again see more visitors than we typically did prior to the pandemic. To proactively respond to this, Dorset Council formed a Dorset Council operational group. The purpose of this group was to help plan and coordinate the internal response by Dorset Council and link this with response from organisations including Dorset's coastal town councils, Dorset Police and the Civil Contingency Unit. I'm presenting this paper as I chaired the Dorset Council operational group. The standing members of the group included equivalent heads of service from across the Police Directorate, and much of the work delivered by the operational group was covered by business as usual activities that Dorset Council was set up to deliver prior to the pandemic. However, with the additional demands caused by having more visitors, the group was needed to coordinate the overall response and particularly to plan for individual events or changing stages in the government's COVID roadmap. As the work to respond to visitor demand encompassed much of the business as usual that Dorset Council would have delivered without the pandemic, the paper here cannot cover everything that was done to plan for summer 2021 tourism in Dorset. Instead, the report covers 3 key areas, and these are the overarching operational plan for increased response, the communication strategy to influence visitors' behaviour, and also the review of the end of the peak, or the review at the end of the peak season. My request to the committee is in 3 parts. So I request that you review the paper set out in this paper, review the response set out in this paper, review and test or challenge any assumption or proposed course of action as part of the scrutiny role. And thirdly, to understand the gaps that remain at this stage in terms of the expectations for response to anticipated increased visitor demand in 2022 and the risk that this represents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Wiltshire. So members will see the recommendations review the response set out in this paper, review and test and challenge any assumption or proposed course of action as part of the scrutiny role, understand the gaps that remain at this stage in terms of the expectations for the response to anticipated increased visitor demand in 2022 and the risk this represents. Could I now move to the portfolio holder if there's anything to add to the report?
Yes, Chairman, and thank you for giving me the opportunity. This report sets out exactly the pressures that we were under during 2021, and obviously part of the report highlights some of the things we need to do for 2022. The 2021 report, I'd just like to emphasise Jack Wiltshire and his team and other officers did a superb job in making sure that we provided what was needed to make sure that it was a success. But also some people, and I'm looking at one at the moment in Matt Piles, went above the call of duty because he kept me fully informed every weekend as what was happening. And these are the sort of things that the general public don't see. The amount of effort and energy and commitment that goes into the work that is covered by this report. The report is quite simple to understand, and hopefully members will take it on face value. Councillor Knocklacey-Clark, who's one of my lead members, dealt with a lot of the tourism elements and will continue to do that as part of his job in 2022. So if you've got any technical questions on things that happened, either Matt Piles, Jack, myself or Knock would be only too pleased to answer. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I think as various members, particularly myself, are fully aware of the terrific workload that was done by the officers during the pandemic period and how exhaustive that was. Well, I've got to Mr. Piles. Is there anything you want to add at this point?
No, Chairman, if I may, I think from me, it's recognising the work that Dorset Council have done at front line, all the terrific engagement with the communities, and make sure that we make Dorset the place that people love to come and visit, Chair. So that's probably all I will say at the present moment.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'll move to non-committee members to ask questions, and the first person I've got is Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Jack. Can I say first up, I really enjoyed reading this report. I think it's very detailed and very fulsome. However, I'd really want to talk about one of the objectives that you've put in the report, and I've read it 2 or 3 times now, and I'm struggling to, when you put something in as an objective, and this probably goes to Matthew and Ray as well. So on page 29 of the report, so that's page 3 of the actual report, in the introduction, one of the objectives is maximising commercial opportunities. That's in the introduction. It's also restated on page 31, item page 5 as an objective. So the objective of this report is to maximise commercial opportunities. It's not mentioned in the report at all as to specifically what we did or do to maximise commercial opportunities. Now, it may be implicit that the things that we do in the report add up to making the best of the commercial opportunities in Dorset. I fully accept that, but it doesn't say that in the report, and it doesn't in any way mention, this is obviously a theme of mine all through from Dorset Council. It sort of gets worse because between pages 51 and 57 of the review, it doesn't mention anything about commercial opportunities either. And then when you get to the Love Dorset evaluation report, it's also an objective in that, but it doesn't mention it in there either. So I'm sort of, whilst I enjoyed the report, and I think it's a really complex, you know, there's lots of strings here that you've pulled together. If we're going to put it as an objective, I think we either leave it in and do something or say something about it, or if it's not an objective, take it out. Because just to put it in and leave it was that's sort of my advice, really. So I'd welcome your comments on that. But I should add, it should not detract from what I think was a well-written report on a complex subject. And I can see the pain and hours that have gone into this. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. You picked up on one of the points that I thought as well. So which officer would like to respond to that?
I'm quite happy to come back on that, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Wiltshire.
So thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Gray. Yes, I recognise the points you make there. I think the difficulty in writing a report was where do you stop in terms of summarising everything that Dorset Council did in terms of responding to the pandemic and the additional visitor demand. And you're quite right. It is, I suppose, implicit to the work that we were doing. So within the report, we talk about a section of funding which is the Welcome Back Fund. That fund was previously. It's a very similar fund to that previously called Reopening the High Streets. So those are both specifically looking at trying to see how we can get people back into the high streets and leaving the lockdown situation to go back out into society and make sure that we do increase or take the best opportunities to maximise commercial opportunities as a result of that. So one of the things we were particularly trying to do there was to see how we can make sure that people can go and access shops, businesses within Dorset and particularly in the key tourist location areas in the safest way possible. That's where it links to the other element of funding, which is the COMP funding, which stands for Contain Outbreak Management Funding. But that's where the group was trying to see how we can get people, and we know we're going to see a lot of additional visitors, how we can have a lot of additional visitors use our businesses, spend money in Dorset, but do that safely. So that's where that link was. I completely recognise we've not highlighted that in the report, and I take that as a learning opportunity.
Jack, you've just written your summary there, which I would leave it in. I would leave it in. But if that's what you were trying to do, all I was looking for was a paragraph to say, and in doing all of these things, planning, bringing the communication, access, all of that, we've achieved it or not. I mean, visitor numbers are up, so I assume from that we've been fairly successful in attracting people. So you've written the summary, but it is a key objective. So addressing that would be good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. My next speaker is, I've got no other non-committee members to speak, so I'll move to the committee, and my first one is Councillor Roberts.
Thank you very much, Chairman. There's a couple of points, I think, for Jack, or maybe points or slight questions. Just looking down as Chair of the Harbours Committee, where you mention, seasonal harbour staff. This is an annual. We take on seasonal harbour staff every year. Would you normally include a regular, normal activity as part of a report for this particular year? It's just a question because it happens every year. The second part, I haven't trawled through every bit, but are we looking at the commercial opportunities of the scheduled 66 cruise liners coming into Portland Port and those 3,500 to 4,000 passengers on each one coming into Weymouth, and what we're actually doing to encourage a spend in Weymouth? That's one little question. The other is where you talk about social distancing and safety. In my particular ward, the wild camping, where at one point there were over 100 people camping at West Bexington. I know it's not strictly on council land, but could you just comment on what is being operationally done to try to minimise the effect on residents? Thank you. Sorry, that's rather complex. 3 items.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. Mr. Wiltshire.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll pick up item 1 and 3 on there. Item 2 might not be appropriate for me to respond on, but so first of all, the increased resources, so the seasonal work, seasonal work that does take place. Yeah, absolutely. Of course, that takes place every year. I think what we're looking at with this year with the additional funding was over and above on top of that. So working particularly with town councils such as Weymouth Town Council, we recognise that they would need to have more staff to manage those additional visitors, and equally that linked to harbours. I think the report also says in there about lifeguard cover with RNLI. So yes, of course that takes place every year. It's a seasonal activity, but this was in addition to that as well. But if I can go on to the third point you made about West Bexington in particular, yes, that was one of our particular highlighted points, and I think it probably demonstrated the need for an operational group where we could be having a meeting of minds, because in the past I think we would probably have to have responded to that individually or just spoken to the police on a one-to-one basis, whereas having the Dorset Council operational group meant that we had elements of police there, elements of highways, of parking. Obviously at West Bexington you can park there overnight, and we also had our licensing teams. So yes, as you say, that was private land. It still then became a Dorset Council issue because there was, if I say poor behaviour exhibited, but I think in the report I go into the issues in a little bit more detail. But people were digging their own latrines at the back of the beach, which is obviously completely unacceptable. And for us, we just work closely with police and COVID marshals to see if we could encourage people not to do things like that. But if it was something which was becoming unlawful, if the police could actually take action, and also from a monitoring side of view point of things, CCTV was something we put in place there. So we've invested in additional CCTV cameras, which can be mobile. So looking forward to next summer, if we do see similar issues, we can record what's happening there, which makes it far easier to enforce. The various bylaws in place at West Bexington are quite difficult to enforce unless you have got some form of recorded evidence. So we think we'll be in a better place this summer. I'd like to think that last summer we were probably in a better place than 2020, but hopefully improving picture there for something which is actually quite difficult to deal with.
Thank you. Why can't you comment on passengers from cruise, or is it Matt? Are you going to?
Yeah, I'm going to Mr. Piles to answer that.
Sorry, Chair, I did apologise. I didn't introduce myself last time. So I'm Matthew Piles. I'm the Corporate Director responsible for economic growth and infrastructure. So in response to point 2, we are in continual discussions with Portland Port and partners throughout Dorset, Councillor Roberts, to make sure that we maximise those opportunities. Absolutely right. Economic growth is the heart of everything we do. And I think, can I just make one reflection, Chair, is that the partnership working with Dorset Police and other agencies as part of this work will continue this year as well, and that's quite important to make that note. That's probably one of the successes of the Summer Operations Group, of how we work together across Dorset.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, may I come back slightly on particularly on the West Bexington one? I requested and received a report from a Chief Superintendent on this, which I was disappointed when the report said that it was all peaceful and there was no evidence of drug taking, and didn't actually refer to the fact that it was illegal camping and the nuisance value to the residents. And I have taken this up with the Police and Crime Commissioner, who is going to continue to, I think, work with us on the problem of the wild camping.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if I can move to Councillor Heatley.
Thank you, Chair. I found this report massively reassuring, and it led me to appreciate better the huge amount of work that's been done by an awful lot of people. My ward contains two of the smaller sources of aggravation, and like Councillor Roberts, I'm obviously very interested in what happens close to me. None of them are on the Durdle-Door scale. One is Weymouth Harbour, the other is the small beach at Castle Cove. I won't say much about Weymouth Harbour because in a way I think that's in the business as usual category, where the problems are well known, they've been going on for years. It's not been a particular feature of the last year or two. The problems at Castle Cove are the occasional party being effectively assembled on the beach, which causes considerable distress to the people who live around there. And we had one or two such incidents this summer. I have to thank Matthew Piles for very patiently educating me in the ways of the coordinating group. But most important, he was willing to give to me phone numbers that I could give to one or two responsible community leaders, so they had a place to go to when these events occurred. And that had a massive effect. I don't even know whether it's been used, and I suspect not. But it is important to be able to give the community leaders in the places where these rather random events turn up some access to the group and to the feeling that they can do something about it. Can I say one other thing? There's a huge lot of trigger points and so on and so forth in this paper. I looked at that and I thought, well, this is all a bit formulaic, and the things that can give rise to trouble don't necessarily quite fit this kind of thing. You've got to kind of be fleet of foot and realise there's a situation that is developing that may be of itself unusual, unexpected, and I hope the trigger points are not taken too seriously. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Heatley. Do the officers wish to comment?
Chair, if I may, on the last point, there's a reason why there are trigger points there, Councillor, and it's to do with our work with the Local Resilience Forum. So I've had the pleasure of being the COVID Silver for Dorset Council throughout, which is the tactical lead. We work with all the other agencies in Dorset to make sure it is a safe place. So you're absolutely fleet of foot, but there is a rationale behind the reasoning because we were in command and control as part of the COVID response when it was very serious in the early days, but point taken.
Okay. Councillor Heatley, you satisfied with that?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So move on to Councillor Andrews.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I was just interested in the table at 11.1 on costings, and I'll just pick out a couple, which was communication management, over 120,000. I do believe that's the correct figure. Just wondered what that was spent on, and quite interesting because I'm the vice chairman of the licensing committee. £2,628 spent on licensing. That I presume that's over and above what we would normally spend, because I know the licensing crews are out during the summer inspecting premises, etc. So that was a bit of interest for me. I have to say, on the recent point that was brought up, cruise ships, we had a lot of visitors into Sherborne from the cruise ship, so it did definitely benefit our economy from there. And as Mr. Heatley just pointed out, the importance of community leaders having phone numbers, etc., I think was exceptional, and the proactive and reactive response from our response teams was all over the county. I think was absolutely superb. So I would just like to thank all the officers involved for that, for their response to things that were going on. So that was it from me.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Do the officers want to respond, or?
Yes, Chair, happy to come back on that.
Yep.
So the 2 points there on the costs, and this is from page 18 of the document. the first point picked up there, the communications management. So the 120,000 there is looking at the overall comms strategy which was used. As probably, if I refer to it as our biggest weapon, I'm probably not overemphasising that. But we really had an issue with people demonstrating poor behaviour in 2020, and the appendix C to this report, I think, looks at some of the information we got back there in terms of probably some of the behaviours which we saw this year. So we saw a much better picture. So we didn't see the barbecue fires. We didn't see 2 helicopters on Dore Beach because people have been multiple tombstoning height. So I don't quote me on this, but I think it's getting on for 60 metres off there. I mean, there were people who just made some very, very strange decisions, whereas having a really good targeted comms message going out, and I did test this. I tested it with people that I knew sort of in London and Birmingham and areas which we knew that people were coming to visit us on day visits from, and using the social media approach, using targeted social media and targeted comms strategies. The right people, I think, did in a lot of cases get these messages, and they're only very subtle. The pictures are shown in the appendix, which are essentially a respect programme, and I think people took notice of that. People did come here and they showed more respect. Yes, we did see litter being dropped, but I think we saw less than that the year before. We had a lot of people making more sensible decisions. So yes, the funding there was the overall comms strategy, which I believe was quite successful. The second part you pick up there of licensing enforcement, £2,628 is a very small amount. Obviously, there's business as usual licensing, but my understanding is that amount of funding was used to put on additional licensing checks with the police, and particularly in areas like Custom House Key. So our licensing officers made joint inspections with the police, which I think gave quite a good visible presence.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I just, while we're on that table, I've got a couple of queries myself on that. Planning resource, 2 enforcement officers at 80,000. Which
Jack, would you like me to pick? Okay, so Chair, if I may, that was to allow our planning team to work 24/7, 7 days a week, and that was the additional cost to the authority.
Got you. Okay, because there's several lines here of figures, and it would be helpful with a bit of background as to it. Country park visitor destinations. What was that? So 28,769.
Yeah, my recollection of that one, Chair. We don't have the representative from Country Parks on the call today, but I think a lot of that was to do with providing additional facilities, which were predominantly, I think, toilet facilities. And we had so many people coming to those parks, there literally weren't enough toilets. And we also got into a situation where we had to close some of the country parks. They just got too busy. The car parking wasn't available. So that linked back into the comms messaging, but we had to try and say, actually, this one's full. Could you try and go somewhere else? But yes, I think that was Avonheath Country Park as the majority of that funding.
Okay.
I believe, Chair, that's correct. I mean, a lot of the funding throughout was providing additional resource, both people and equipment. So, as Jack said, traffic management, portable toilets, etc., to allow people to safely visit Dorset and our tourist attractions.
Okay, and I've got to ask this next one, and you're not going to thank me for it, and because obviously we were reacting to a situation that was unprecedented. But in terms of the Marshall Event Security Southern, was that tendered, or did we just go to the one company?
We discussed that with our procurement teams, and the decision for that was made through our scheme of delegation. So the answer was that did go to one company, but it was within the limits of our scheme of delegation.
Okay, that was purely because of the timeframes that were involved. We didn't have time to go to tender, obviously. Ambassadors Volunteer Programme, 100,000.
So, Chair, if I pick that one up, so one of our colleagues led that volunteer programme that was quite successful across Dorset. They are reviewing that at the moment, and that may be a further discussion for scrutiny and for a further discussion.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you for those explanations. Okay, I've got Councillor Took to speak.
Thanks, Chair. Just following up on, it's almost a couple of things related to what you've just been asking about and others, but we've got items are in the table at 11.1 for car park management and for the towaway zones. Now, car park management, more cars, more management required, more, but presumably on both of these elements, or all three of these lines, there are revenues to set against these. So the figures presented here, net of, so in case of car parking, revenues over and above what is normal for that time of year anyway, if we're having more cars. And for the towaway zones, revenues based on, presumably people have to pay to get their vehicle back once it's been towed away. So are there any net figures, or are these the net figures?
Happy to pick that one up, Chair.
Yes, please.
I'll pick up the towaway policy first. The towaway policy is actually probably more visual than wanting to literally tow people's cars away. I mean, if we do take people at their word. If they come here to visit Dorset, they hopefully come here for a good day, and if you get your car towed, that's going to ruin it. So we wanted to be visual on that. We wanted to make sure the traffic regulation orders that we put in place were clearly presented, and people knew that if you parked in certain areas, you were going to get your vehicle towed. The previous year, we didn't have this in place to such a good degree. The term fly parking, I think, arose. So people had worked out that a penalty charge notice actually probably wasn't a huge amount of money in comparison to some other parts of the area to park. And if the car parks were full, they on occasions abandoned in places which weren't safe. And the concern for us for that was particularly buses were finding it difficult to get past, but also emergency services, a fire engine would find it very difficult to get past, particularly so at Ferry Road in Studland, because if you exclude the ferry as being a way out of the peninsula, you've only got one road out, which is an extreme fire concern. So we needed to make sure that people aren't blocking that route. So the cost there at £15,551, that was actually setting up the towaway system, making sure that people were on standby on appropriate days and having that visual deterrent. We actually only towed one car over the entire summer, so it was not going to wash its face in terms of the amount of money we could charge for collection, but I think it probably did what it was meant to do in terms of keeping that area safe when we had far more people than we would usually see.
Chair, can I just add one thing, if I may, Jack?
Certainly, Mr. Powers.
The reason why that we wanted to put this in was a huge visual enforcement to the residents at Studland, but also that request came through the Local Resilience Forum, and it came on the back of what happened in Bournemouth. If you remember, Chair, there was a major incident, and one of the things that triggered it was fly parking. Jack is aware that we have both raised this nationally with DFT about whether government would consider what the minimum charge would be, and I attended meetings with colleagues from BCP raising this because the whole of the Southwest had this issue. So it was a deterrent, in essence, Councillor, and it worked, and we need to look at it how we make sure that it works this year as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but would you like me to? I can pick up the second point in terms of the additional car park management costs as well, if you would like.
Okay, please do.
So the costs there were for additional hours for our civil enforcement officers, and also we had a lot more penalty charge notices contested. So for us to be able to process penalty charge notices and do the paperwork there, we required to take on an extra member of staff. So it's an extra member of staff plus overtime, which is making up those figures. I take the point about whether it's net or gross. Actually, our income from parking penalty charge notices last year was probably down compared to a standard year prior to the pandemic. That's because more of our car parks would have been full, and I think just over the full year where you didn't have a lockdown situation, we would have got more income from penalty charge notices. So while I recognise in the summer months that there was increased money coming through from penalty charge notices on specific occasions, the money here was specifically for the actual overtime and the additional officer time to process those.
Chair, can I just add one bit of detail, which is very important? firstly, our civil enforcement officers were our ambassadors of Dorset Council. They are the first frontline people that people see, but also we asked them to actually enforce in unsociable hours, in particular areas where we had problems with camper vans. So we had to make sure that we had the resource across county, and a lot of the requests actually came from members, Chair, to make sure that we were enforcing our car parks in our rural locations. So that's the other reason as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
You happy, Councillor Took?
Yeah, thank you for that response. Overall, I mean, car parking and management of car parking is critical, as you say, to allow free flow of traffic and to stop inconveniencing residents. So overall, would you say that the car park management, the towaway zone signage, and these deterrent effects actually had a significant effect on the level of car parking? And I'm hoping the answer is yes.
Do you want me to pick that one?
Certainly.
So the answer you usually expect is yes, but we're still learning, Councillor Took, if I may, and we need to make sure that we welcome visitors to Dorset and we manage our car parks accordingly. So you will see that in the next phase of the parking transformation. Not for today, but there will be further work that we will come back to members in the near future.
Okay, look forward to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Took. Councillor Roberts.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think this is probably one for Matt. This excellent whole programme with you being silver lead, we are likely, I suspect, to have maybe not quite the concentration of visitors, but possibly higher than we have had. Will we still get central government funding? Is there any indication of that? And even if there isn't, will this programme still be able to be put into place?
Did you want Councillor Bryant to answer that?
Well, it's good. I can answer that, Chair, and I'm sure Councillor Bryant will probably, and I'll make sure I do the correct answer, otherwise I'll be in trouble. So we recognise that stay vacations is a continuing importance for economic growth for Dorset to recover. We know that stay vacations will be very busy this year. We're putting in place resources financially to make sure that the plans we had in place last year we can look at, cut our cloth accordingly, but we may have to ask for contingency monies this year from Dorset Council. I don't know if Councillor Bryan wants to say whether I got that right or not, if I may.
As always, you get it right, Matt. I've got no problem with that. I would like to add, though, and it's something that's not been mentioned so far, the success of the sitting out areas that we had to provide during this troublesome year, we will continue to provide. That has had a tremendous effect on the visitor atmosphere when they visit Weymouth, and we just need to highlight some of the successes that we've got from this, as well as the fact that we are still learning. I am looking forward, and you're right, Mark, I don't think we'll see the same numbers this year as people tend to travel abroad again, but I think what people saw from the way Dorset behaved last year will encourage people to come back, maybe not for their full holiday, but I think we'll find an extended season where people come to us sort of outside the season. But I am looking forward to a growth in the camping and the motorhomes. It's no secret the motorhome population has grown tremendously. Matt and the car parking team and I and Knock are all working on trying to provide provisions for sort of the camper type of holiday. And these are the sort of things we're looking at for the coming years. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Happy with that, Councillor Roberts?
May I come back on just one small point, which Certainly. Is really to do with place? Maybe is the planning department advised of the direction of helping and assisting to approve applications for camping? Because it appears that it's not. I'll just leave it at that if anyone wants to comment.
So, Chair, if I may, as the Director of Planning, I should comment on that, if I may. The answer should be yes, Councillor Roberts. If not, could we have a separate conversation about any particular issues? It would be unfair to discuss it here.
Obviously, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just want to quickly return back to that table. I take it that the table at 11.1 on the top of page 19. I take it that the unbudgeted safe space was where we created those road barriers to widen the areas for public footfall. Is that what I'm looking at there?
No, that's not, Chair.
It's
would you like
not,
to go back in
okay.
more detail?
Yeah, please.
So, apologies, I've moved things around, so I might be looking in the wrong place. So the safe space was actually an initiative which was put up to help protect vulnerable people, particularly in Weymouth area and Custom House Quay area. It was recognised that some people were feeling very uncomfortable being out late at night and feeling vulnerable in that situation. So the safe space area allowed people to go to somewhere, well, I said, that's what it says on the tin, where you could go there, maybe have some medical attention if medical attention is required, but just know that you can be safe and secure and not be in a vulnerable situation. And I think that's really appreciated by a lot of people, and something which has been heralded as good news.
Okay, thank you. And you just mentioned the Custom House Quay placemaking, which was 154,000 in the table.
Yeah, so the Custom House Quay placemaking it extends on to the work that we were going to originally do at Custom House Quay. But what that money did was enable us to go further in terms of, well, we're using various placemaking, but making the environment nicer, making the environment more friendly to visitors, and particularly under the funding that we've used here, not to concentrate everyone in one particular focused area. So at Custom House Quay, we've been looking at using enhanced materials, having better sitting out, better seating areas, so we can spread people out across Custom House Quay. So we always know that's going to be a central focal of attention, or focus of attention. But the additional funding we've got there is to use better materials and actually encourage people to spend time in all parts of Custom House Quay rather than being focused in very particular areas.
Okay, thank you. When looking at those tables, it soon mounts up, doesn't it, the costs involved? So I take it that the government outbreak fund, government contained outbreak fund, and the government welcome back fund, they've both, those monies that have been spent have contributed to the way Dorset was able to react to the pandemic. And I take it that there was that both those funds actually covered the costs, the additional costs that Dorset Council faced. Thank you. Okay, now for another silly question. As you said earlier in your report, and we all saw it, and we saw it in the national news, it was unprecedented really to land 2 helicopters on a beach at Durdle Door. Could I just ask who picks the cost up for that? I know who the Gold Commander was on that day, and I think Dorset Council were obviously heavily involved in that operation over that tragedy. But who actually picks the cost up for that? Excuse my ignorance.
Chair, happy to come back on that.
Yep.
So what actually happened there was termed a major event. I think it was Dorset Police who actually called the major event. But the definition of a major event or major incident is where one particular body is, or one public body is not able to respond to it on their own under their business as usual. And the example of what happened at Lulworth was exactly that. So there is a requirement from Coast Guard, ambulance, I think there's probably a fire element, but clearly police, and from Dorset Council. So the Dorset Council element was recognising that there was a perfect storm brewing there. There was so much demand to get to the beach on such a hot day, and the beach was already at capacity, and there were injuries taking places, but more people still wanted to get to Lulworth, and that's where the decision had to be taken by Dorset Council as operator for the roads going from Wool and Winfrith up to Lulworth. But we needed to close the road and close it immediately. So Dorset Council picked up the costs there for the traffic management for closing the road because of an incident which was related to another party. Obviously, we didn't pay the cost for the helicopter, but we did have to cover the cost of road closures.
So, Chair, if I can add, this all comes under the Civil Contingencies Act.
Yeah.
And our duties as what we call a Category 1 responder, and Jack is aware, as we're fellow Silvers, that if there's a major emergency, we have to provide our resource work, which we can. So that's the position, basically.
Okay, thank you. Okay, page 20 at 20 and 21, Dorset Council Operational Group DCOG operated over an extended period of time with no member input and no member overview or observance. Now, obviously, the group performed extremely well, but I just wondered whether going forward, whether there should be some member overview of that. So
Chair, if I may, Councillor Knott, Lacey Clark and Councillor Breyer were continually briefed following these operational meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And they fed back into the member webinars that we had. So there is member involvement. I don't know if Councillor Breyer and Councillor Knott, Lacey Clark want to comment on that, but they were fully informed 24/7.
Okay, that's good to hear. Councillor Lacey Clark.
Thank you, Chairman.
Give me some assurance.
Yeah, we were absolutely kept informed and updated all the way through and at all hours of the day. The officers went above and beyond to make sure we knew what was happening on the ground and to respond to any concerns we had. And members came directly to us as well, and so there was constant member input and oversight.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Okay, page 21 at 14.1. Are officers satisfied with the multi-agency local resilience forum, how it operated and performed, and particularly with regards as to what assurance do we have that town and parish councils have an up-to-date local resilience plans in place that will dovetail with the local resilience forum at the upper level authority and its partners, including the Blue Light Services?
Jack, do you want me to answer that one, or would you like to answer that one?
If you want to volunteer, you're more than welcome.
So the answer is probably one of the biggest positives out of the summer operations is how we work across the local resilience forum with our key partners, Chair.
Yep.
There's always work to be done, and it will be continued to be done. And also, I think it's very important is the continued work between Dorset Council and Dorset Police in particular, because most of the concerns raised from members were a joint issue, if I'm allowed to say that out loud. So we will continue to work with towns and parish councils, members, and the local resilience forum. And if we've got anything to report back, we will report back.
Okay, thank you. And do you feel that town and parish councils have sufficient resilience plans in place? It's a difficult one because across the entire county they're going to be at varying different levels.
I think you've got to just reflect on this wasn't something that we could plan for, particularly in the first year, that we put in plans for the second year, and we liaise with the town and parish councils. I may want just to bring in Mark Eyre, if I may, Chair, because he is the lead on emergency planning.
Certainly, so he has requested to speak. Mr. Eyre.
Thank you very much. I just really wanted to provide a little bit of reassurance there, Chair, because we are one of the work streams that we're particularly putting some additional emphasis in this year is around community resilience. It's working with the town and parish councils to improve the arrangements that they've got in place. So that's picking up more momentum as we speak.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, I've got Councillor Took.
Thanks, Chair. I think this whole report is very good. Thank you very much. I want to look at the improvement action plan, page 23, 24 and 25 and 26, I think, where we have things that are planned to happen and decision dates or by when dates, the earliest of which are 21st of February. Now, how confident are we that these dates, when a decision is due, will be made by those due dates? Is there any slippage or any areas where there might be slippage that we can have an early warning on? And indeed, if so, by what sort of amount are we likely to slip? Because summer will be here, ready or not, as it were. So just a little confidence around the dates, the target dates, and what potential areas there might be of difficulty in meeting those dates, if any.
Yeah, just before you answer that, because that was going to be my next question, and Councillor Took is quite right as far as I'm concerned in whether there's any concern around this or not, and whether we meet those dates as to when we're going to have that work done. Because I was going to ask if we could actually bring this back to this committee once you've done that piece of work, and possibly in a future meeting to also invite in the blue light services into that meeting for their view on how 2021 went. So as Councillor Took asked, could I have an answer from the officers, please?
Thank you, Chair. Happy to come back on that one. So the two dates which are set there, and I think Mark might join us in a minute as well. The two dates set there are the forthcoming half term and then also the Easter period. So those are our, I suppose, cut-off dates for when we might likely see increased visitor demand. Clearly, the highest visitor demand is going to be in the peak of the school summer holidays again. But everything's looking good in terms of meeting those requirements at the moment. We know that we have got some funding allocated, so that's enabling us to make some of those key decisions. It is happening in the background, so everything looks good to me.
Okay, so you're confident that these dates, that there's none of these points will slip.
So, Chair, if I can add just to reassure Councillor Took, yes, we are confident that the dates will be delivered, and we're happy to come back to a future meeting. And picking up the Chair's point, yes, it would be a really good idea to get the other blue light services view of the summer operations and how we're working jointly as we move forward for this year.
Thank you, Mr. Hales. Thank you.
From my point of view, thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Took. Did Mr. Eyre want to make any comment at this point? I appreciate if he doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jack and Matthew covered that pretty well. But I mean, it's probably just worth mentioning that at the end of the last summer period, from a multi-agency perspective, there was also a similar sort of debrief session as what we ran internally, and that was very positive in terms of the way that the partners all work together.
Yeah, thank you. And to pick up that point and how all the partners work together, I take it that our close neighbours, Devon, Wiltshire, and certainly BCP area, there was good work between those organisations as well. BCP suffered quite horrendously in the previous year, didn't they?
They did. I mean, certainly the work was very close in terms of working with BCP as part of Dorset, but even in terms of the neighbouring authorities, from a local resilience forum, there's a lot of communication between the various local resilience forums.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, can I also add, this is a national problem as well. So there were quite a few meetings, you can appreciate, with all the leads nationally about similar issues that we then raised with government about some of the antisocial behaviour, if that makes sense, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if I can move to page 42, trigger point for highways. Yeah, trigger point for highways, gridlock, redirecting traffic. And this is done in tandem with highways, roadworks in the locality, particularly regarding utilities. So I just want an assurance that while we're doing our bit in redirecting traffic, as you said earlier, Mr. Wiltshire, when the beaches are packed and we were redirecting traffic, trying to move the traffic away from the beaches and giving the motorists those early warnings. And I dare say that with highways, roadworks that were going on, that was working in tandem with that, and we were aware of it. Were we also aware of what utilities were doing in some of their emergency work?
Indeed. So I, as head of highways, also hold the statutory duty of traffic manager for Dorset Council. So yes, if there's emergency works required by utilities, they are required to inform us of those, and we get the joined up picture of our own works and utilities works. The trigger points there, is I think Councillor Took alluded to, they're indicative, I suppose, for a plan, because you do need to have a plan, but obviously they're flexible as well. So that if we saw something which was evolving more rapidly, we could respond to that proactively, well, reactively, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if I can just go to page 54, the summary of findings. And I got to say, it is a really excellent report, a lengthy report, massive amount of work that went into it. But the summary of findings is a bit hit and miss in places. I think we could have had a meeting just around these tables on its own. And I get the feeling there's a little bit more work that needs to be done on some of that summary of findings. There was one. town councils. Parish and town councils really appreciate them putting involvement. And then you go across the right-hand column and it says, what could we have done differently? And it was summer operations briefings at town and parish councils. It may make more sense to the report authors, but the way it's laid out doesn't quite fit and doesn't quite flow. And
Chair, if I may, just to give you a short, I think one of the issues was communication about what lessons we learnt throughout the summer of how we cascade information. We're always here to learn. I think one of the things is continued webinars with the towns and parishes. We have them as part of the summer operations group so that they understand operation. They have representatives as well, but also it's just as important, and please don't forget that members of Dorset Council are hugely important about summer operations, about the information we get out. So we will continue to plan and, if necessary, put in the webinars as we did this year as well, which is hugely important. So I can understand your concern, but it's probably how it is written rather than the outcome, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Chair, can I come in, please?
Certainly.
Okay, it's Mark out. So, I mean, essentially, what that table that you've just been referring to, that pretty much summarises the discussions that came out from the debrief bit of work that we did. So, as I say, that element of it is capturing things that the various different people involved in the debrief said during the session. What we then did is pulled the actions that are earlier on in the report, which bring out the key points following on from those discussion points. If that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. As I say, not to detract from the report and for all the work that was done. It's been excellent. Okay, I've got no other questions in the chat bar. So if I move into the debates session of it, I mean, my observation is from page 66 is the communications team. We've had good feedback on their campaign. It would be a pity if all of the hard work and use of government funding were wasted on such a short-lived campaign. And the ongoing message of enjoyed and loving Dorset should continue for 5 years, and funding needs to be found for this as a not so much as a recommendation, but as a note from this committee. I think I don't know how the other members feel about that, but it seems that such good work was done over this period. It would be a shame if we didn't actually continue with the message. I appreciate that probably the numbers that we've experienced in the last year that have come into Dorset, the staycations, we're not going to see, as it would appear that this virus is now is starting to weaken, and hopefully we're going to return to its some point normality again. So how do the committee feel about that? But to take that as that's something that we can put forward to the officers, that we need to source that funding for a communications team to continue the good work that's been done. Okay.
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you. Okay. If no other committee members got any other point to make, Councillor Took.
Just to say yes, I agree with you. I'm cautiously optimistic about the pandemic. We'll see what happens. But on the table that you were looking at before, one of the first items on there was funding. So on where are we? Yeah.
Page 54, A1.1.
Yeah, A1.1, A3.1. Funding needs to be determined prior to 2022 summer planning. I guess some of that is dependent on the budget being approved, and we can't make plans to spend money that we are not certain we're going to get. But in terms of, I presume what this is talking about is how to split whatever funding is agreed within the council's budget. Is that work sort of ongoing on various assumptions, or how we're working? Because that funding really seems to be, well, it's rightly there at number one on the list. It's critical to the whole thing.
Chair, if I may, so the answer is yes, Councillor. We are in constant discussions with both John Selgren and Aidan Dunn about funding. We have a provisional budget. We need to make sure that operationally we can deliver. There may be a call on contingency depending on the summer demand. So it's organic, Councillor Tuck, because we have to plan for the unexpected, if that makes sense.
I appreciate that. It's obviously it just says funding needs to be determined prior to the 2022 summer planning.
So initial
earlier the better, really, isn't it?
Yeah, initial funding has been agreed, Councillor Tuck, with the aid and done. So we're confident what we've got.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Tuck. Thank you, Mr. Piles. Okay, I've got no other requests to speak at this debate section. I think I can take it that we are quite impressed with this document that come forward. Mr. Sogren, you want to speak?
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies. Just I know you're seeking to move on, but just to indulge Councillor Tuck's question is to add to what Matthew said very accurately about that. So the Director of Public Health, who holds the Containment Outbreak Management funding, and his team have considered a request from us for some of the funding that's available, which hasn't been spent, which we understand on good authority can be carried forward. So we've made an application into the fund to carry that over into the summer of this year, 2022. But of course, as members were highlighting right at the beginning of this discussion, this has been one-off funding. So we need to be mindful of that. One of the things we'll be doing with the team, and again, perhaps with the comments in this committee meeting this morning, just reflecting on those areas where the council would have the greatest impact. But we will, in the fullness of time, need to embed this activity into the business as usual work of the various council departments that have supported the operation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Roberts, did you wish to make a comment?
And it was to propose the recommendation, Chairman, if you need a proposer.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, could I have a second to that?
Sorry, Chairman, it's Lindsay in Democratic Services. Can I just check, because obviously the recommendation as set out in your report sort of poses things for you to consider and opportunities. So I think you can obviously say that you've reviewed the paper, but it might be that you might just want to think about what you might want to include in that recommendation if there are particular things you want to carry forward in terms of the response from 2021 or moving forward to 2022. I think I might just need, for the purpose of the minutes, just a bit more if there were particular things you want to actually pull out.
Okay, I didn't actually make note of some of the discussions as it went through.
If it would be of assistance to you, I think if Lindsay's got a note, or perhaps Matthew could helpfully just summarise for you, and then if it would be helpful for the committee and to you, Chairman, I would more than happy if you want to then refer it to me. So you say these are the recommendations of the committee, because in this case, unlike other reports that we consider, this is not going on for a decision to anywhere else. This is very much you reflecting on what was done. I think it might, Lindsay just confirm that be appropriate process. Certainly for the virtual meeting, Chairman, for you perhaps then at the conclusion of that to ask me if I would note and take those actions away to progress on your behalf.
Okay, so certainly there was the request to ensure that we had the funding to continue the work that's been done, particularly with the communications team, and also for the committee for the report to come back to committee once those decision making in the February and the April, I think it was, had been progressed, to also bring it into a meeting where we'd have the Blue Light Service and some of the other partners as well, so they could give their view as to how 2021 went. Was the first two that I've got. Is there any other committee members that felt that something that was highlighted that needs to go into the recommendation? No, I've got nothing in the chat bar, so over to you, Mr. Piles.
So I've made note of that, so Chair, and I will be pushing to John Sogren as Executive Director.
Chairman, if you like, I'd be happy to propose that the recommendations go to the Director of Place for review.
Okay, I think we've got a recommendation in the paper. I think I just need to do it as a minded to decision to then place it into the hands of the Director for Place. So I think I had a seconder. Did I not?
I was seconding the proposal. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Tuck. So Are you happy with that, Ms Watson?
Yeah, I think we can sort of do some wording with the recommendation to say that, you know, you've reviewed the response. You've obviously, through your discussion, you have tested and challenged the assumptions, the proposed course of action as part of your scrutiny role. I can link back to obviously the points that will be recorded in the minutes, and also then perhaps for point 3 we pick up on the 2 points that you've just raised in terms of continued funding for comms work, and report back to the committee as your kind of recommendations for sort of future, if people are happy generally with that approach.
Yeah, and to, as I say, to bring in those other partner agencies into a future meeting.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So if I hear no dissent from the members, I'll take that as approved. Thank you, members. Can I just take this time to say thank you to the officers for compiling this report. Thank you to all the officers at Dorset Council who did go above and beyond for the summer of 2021. It was quite a feat actually in the end, and come at quite short notice and was dropped right in your laps. And I know the members across the chamber are extremely appreciative of what the officers did during that period. So thank you.
Chairman, just by way of formality, obviously you've made your minded to recommendation.
Yeah, I'm going to Mr. Selgren now. Yeah. So on the basis of the minded to decision, Mr. Selgren, could I ask you to enact upon it, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Of course I will. I've read the report in full. I've noted and listened very carefully to the comments made by members this morning and the summing up given by the Democratic Services Officer. So we'll carry forward those actions that you requested to me to do this morning under the Council's scheme delegation. Chairman, if I might just reciprocate those thanks, I'd just to say thank you to members, you know, not just in the committee, but I know members more broadly. The support they've given officers over the considerable amount of work done on this over summer has been, you know, enormously helpful. It's really helped sustain their morale, and they've worked colossally hard, as you've all said in this discussion this morning. So we will ensure that those thanks are passed on to everybody, because it was a huge effort that was mounted, and I guess will be taken forward again this summer. But also, if I may, Chairman, just to thank the committee as well, because actually the comments and observations and your very kind feedback, generous feedback on the report has been hugely helpful. And again, I will ensure that those thanks are relayed to all of the teams who did work so hard over the summer to make sure that our visitors had an enjoyable time, our residents also were able to enjoy summer in Dorset, and actually that we know it's contributed a very significant amount to the Dorset economy, so we know it's been good for our businesses and our broader community development. So thank you, Chairman, for the committee's work this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Selgren. Thank you, Mr. Wiltshire, and thank you, Mr. Piles. Okay, so I'm going to move to agenda item 8, Transforming Cities Fund update. Presenting is Mr. Wayne Sayers, Transport Planning Team Leader, and I think Mr. Jack Wiltshire as well is staying for this one.
Yes, Chair, I'll present on Wayne's behalf if you're happy with
present. Yep.
So a very different paper to one we've just heard. This is looking at the Transforming Cities Fund work in South East Dorset, so looking at predominantly active travel work that we're carrying out over there. So following the announcement that Dorset Council and BCP had been successful in securing a grant of £79 million from the Department for Transport in March 2020, a huge amount of work has been achieved under very difficult circumstances. The scale of the task to deliver this level of infrastructure in a relatively short time frame was already significant, and the fact that the team have moved forward at pace with delivery despite the additional pressures and problems that the COVID pandemic presented should be recognised. The governance framework is in place and it's operational. Dorset Council have recruited a dedicated team to deliver our elements of the programme. Public consultation has taken place, designs have been completed and construction is underway. It's also worth highlighting that there has been true and effective joint working on the Transforming Cities Fund works, particularly with officers from Dorset Council and BCP working alongside each other, and also with private consultants, WSP. We've nearly completed the scheme on Lye Road in Wimborne, which is one of the first TCF schemes in the country. And we've also commenced the first phase of work on Ringwood Road in Ferndown. Having completed design work on several other locations, further schemes will commence shortly. As delivery increases, we will move towards a coherent network of cycle routes alongside improved facilities for pedestrians and bus passengers, providing a realistic choice for local people, in how they move about. I've already mentioned the difficult circumstances in which TCF has been delivered. The delivery team continue to review delivery in light of the impacts of COVID-19, including increases in material cost, workforce shortages, and delays to material supply. The Department for Transport have acknowledged these impacts nationally and have provided a change request process should it be required. The team are also reviewing the local match funding profile in light of the delivery programme and will be making adjustments as required. Figures from Q3 of 2021-22 were very recently finalised to provide the latest information. So to date, £44.8 million has been provided to BCP as the lead organisation, and that's from the Department for Transport. Of this, £17.8 million has already been spent on project development and more recently project delivery. And the Dorset Council spend so far is £4.5 million, so 25% of the total so far. The paper requests that committee notes the progress that has been made on the significant Transforming Cities Fund works. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so did the portfolio holder have any comment you wish to make at this point, Councillor Bryan?
Thank you, Chair. Only to add that obviously this is very much work in progress, but I do want to get the point across that the idea of the Transforming Cities Fund is to give our residents alternatives to the use of their car or public transport. This is also coming under the health and well-being sort of discussions. I'm very pleased with the progress we're making, and Chairman, you will know better than most because it's your ward of the work that's been going on. We started off on a pretty fast learning curve, and Jack has said under very difficult circumstances, as we were having to deal with pandemic restrictions and then shortage of supply components. But I think the team have done a first-class job. I drove Lye Road yesterday to get an update on where we were before coming to the committee today. What we are seeing is a fairly large improvement on the cosmetic side of the road for a start, but also the usage of the cycle paths. If you judge it on a wet day, it's not quite so good, but if you judge it on a sunny day, and I go there on several Sundays during the last 6 months, and I've noticed the uptake of this. Once we've got all these connected and have got the barrel bikes installed, which are coming to Wimborne and Ferndown to link in with this scheme, then I think we'll see a tremendous usage of this, which again works in the motorists' sort of advantage because it takes cars off the road, which means there's going to be less traffic on the roads. All in all, I am fully supportive of this programme, and again I congratulate Jack and his team for delivering what we have so far. When I look at the pedestrian crossings and everything down Lye Road, Chairman, these are all advantages to both the cyclists but also the residents in trying to cross a very busy road. We've worked very hard with residents in the area to ensure that we've met as many of their concerns as we can. And I'll highlight one at the bottom end of Brook Road, where a resident was concerned about how he would get out of his drive. We put in special facilities in that area, and those are working exceptionally well. The team have worked very hard on delivering this, and we really are fighting to complete this in the shortest possible time. But with some delays, we still have some work to do. So I'm going to pass back to you, Chairman, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Bryan. And as members will see, as was already said, that I am one of the local ward members whose ward has benefited from this work that's being done. Before I go to any non-committee members to speak, can I just point out the report, and I do apologise, officers, but I only picked this up last night and I was going through it again, where we say Lye Road in the report at 1.4, 2.3, we need to add in Wimborne Road West there. because it wasn't all Lye Road. It was Lye Road, then Wimborne Road West. Yeah, so just from a clarity point of view, and that's obviously in Coal Hill, Wimborne Road West, not in Wimborne. Okay, so I don't appear to have any members or non-committee members to speak. So do I have any committee members that wish to speak to the report? Okay, so if I start, Councillor Heatley.
Thank you, Chair. Very grateful for this report. Terribly pleased to see so much progress and actually getting these places delivered, and really pleased to hear from Councillor Bryan that he thinks the usage of the cycle paths in particular is going to be substantial. It'd be awful if that was not the case, but it's good to see early signs of that. And I note the point he made about how maybe usage will get greater when there is a proper connected network. It is the overriding problem for cyclists, as I know as a cyclist. I read this report coming from where I do with a degree of jealousy, and so the question I'm going to ask is the obvious one. Is there any sign of the government producing a transforming towns and villages fund for us to deal with the rest of Dorset? I appreciate we have a little programme of minor repairs going on in Weymouth at the moment, but it is very much for the southeast, this programme.
Okay, I think I know the answer to that, but officer to report.
Chair, would you like me to come back there?
Certainly.
Yes, so Councillor Heatley, we're very much champing at the bit to see if there's more we can do across Dorset. The news over weekend is that Chris Baldwin has been appointed as the Active Travel Commissioner, so that's fantastic news. He's going to be a real ambassador for active travel, and he's already making it clear that it can't be done without additional funding. So I'm sure he's going to be banging on the doors of Whitehall to try and get more funding for local authorities to make his dreams come to fruition. However, at the moment, the funding we're looking at is active travel funding rather than transforming towns funding. It's probably tying into what we're looking at for our review of our local transport plan, for which active travel is clearly going to be at the heart of it. But yeah, at the moment, there's no indication of a transforming towns scheme per se.
Okay, Councillor Heatley.
Well, I thought that might be the case, but as you say, the new organisation headed by forgotten his Christian name, Boardman, is an excellent sign. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Heatley. Councillor Took.
Thanks, Chair. Actually, Councillor John Andrews was ahead of me.
Oh, I do beg your pardon, Councillor Andrews. Sorry, Councillor Andrews.
You missed me out, Chair. I was just going to back up what Councillor Heatley's just said about jealousy, because we've got several schemes designed in Sherborne, not active travel maybe, but we keep designing schemes and then do anything about it. But I'm speaking to Councillor Gibson about that in a couple of weeks' time anyway. So, but yes, so very, very jealous that there's not a transforming market towns initiative. But it's very difficult to put active cycle lanes in small town streets. So yeah, very difficult. But I look forward to future ventures and future announcements from the active cycling ambassador, Mr. Boardman. Great, thanks.
Thank you. I presume you don't want to comment on that, Mr. Wiltshire. No, I take your point, Councillor Andrews, because what work has been done in Wimborne, it can't progress actually into the centre of the town because of the narrow streets. It's quite a challenge for the highways officers to try and develop a scheme that would allow that to happen. And I think, taken from what you've said, you've got the same problem in Sherborne with very narrow streets and trying to put that type of infrastructure in. Nevertheless, there will be other areas where you will be able to put that infrastructure in should that funding come forward from government, which hopefully in the future it will. I've got a couple of questions, and they're the usual ones.
Chairman, can I?
Councillor Took, sorry. Go for it.
Really, just before we get much deeper into this, I think this this Transforming Cities Fund has been excellent. It's very good. I very much support I think it was Councillor Heatley's point that when they all link up, it'll be great. And it's getting these linkages and getting things linked up that is, I think, critical for this. It's not very much point having a cycleway or a footway that goes from A to B but nowhere else. And in terms of what both Councillor Heatley and Councillor Andrews said about transforming outside of this niche area, for example, one of the things that we're looking at here in Alderholt is the potential for a trailway utilising the old railway line track bed from Wimborne through Verwood, through Alderholt, Fording Bridge, Downton, perhaps. And that's something that is it's in embryonic form at the moment, but I think that sort of initiative would add to the way these things can link together and provide a real route for people to use. And I would support that type of expansion, and I hope the government will come forward with some additional funding for not just cities but for market towns, large villages and the countryside, because the countryside is where most people in Dorset live. Okay, and that was what I was going to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Took. Councillor Bryant.
Yes, and Councillor Took, I agree with you. Just to give you a slight update, if I put my other hat on Green Space, Green Space are working very hard with the highways team to develop part of the Castleman Trailway for use by cyclists in a safe manner. Part of that work is already in progress. I'm very happy to discuss with you how we link up with your area, because I do believe purely from a health and well-being side, we need to encourage people, because we've all been sat at home locked away for the last couple of years. I've got to own up, I've put on a few pounds, so when you see me at full council you'll notice that, but I'll take that on the chin when you accuse me of it. Excuse me, on a serious note, we need to work together to make sure we get the best for all of our communities on this. I am very encouraged by the increased usage, and obviously with people getting on their bikes, not only is it health and well-being, but we need to provide a safe form of alternative travel, which is what this does. It separates the motorist from the cyclist, which will encourage people to cycle of all ages, both young and the more mature. And I put myself very much in that category. But I have actually used a bike on the cycleways recently, and you don't feel quite as threatened on those as you do when driving along a road with cars and lorries passing you. You'll have noticed in the amendments to the Highway Code, there are some extra preferences given to cyclists. How that's going to be received, I don't know, but I actually welcome it, because we need to make sure that we protect the cyclists, because, as I say, it helps with the health and well-being side. But yep, talk to me on how we can extend up to your area. Happy to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Love to do that. And the Highway Code changes in particular really need publicising more. There seems to be an awful lot of lack of knowledge around those, but that's perhaps for a different meeting. Thank you for your response.
Thank you, Councillor Took. Did you wish to add anything, Mr. Wiltshire?
No, nothing to add, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I've got no other request to speak at the moment, so I just want to ask a question at page 74 in the agenda, 9.16 and 9.17 surrounding that. And obviously we've got because of COVID and because of the pandemic and because of the material shortages and such like, I think that what has been achieved has been quite amazing, actually. It does seem in the Wimborne and Coal Hill area that it's taken forever. It feels like it's taken forever, but I appreciate that the work crews having to work on a road that is still remaining open, and putting that infrastructure in is not an easy task. But just like to ask that, are BCP on course to complete their project so we actually get that linking up?
Yes, Chair, happy to come back on that. So both Dorset Council and BCP are working very closely and making sure we are looking to link those projects up. The elements in 9.16, 9.17 relating to the funding there, essentially the DFT have recognised that the pandemic has meant that inflationary items, particularly for construction, have gone up very, very quickly. So they're opening the door there for us to go back to them to say we've experienced increased costs and potentially we can ask for more money to cover those inflationary rises. And BCP and Dorset Council are both in the same position there, but we're seeing that the cost to our schemes are likely to be higher than originally envisaged, and we're going back to the DFT to fund that difference.
That's good, because you've covered my next question about whether we were actually able to get additional funding out of government for that. And Councillor Bryant, you've come in at an opportune moment. You're banging the door against the government, are you?
I wish I had the answer to that, but I don't at the moment. But obviously, we are going to apply for more funding. It was just to point out that I sit on the board of this programme along with Councillor Mike Parks, and we had a board meeting yesterday when all the issues and opportunities were discussed, and I was pleased that the member from the DFT was very cooperative and was in listening mode, but obviously it is down to the DFT to find the extra money, because there will be an overrun of costs, and I'm not willing to surrender any of the programme. We have to get that money, and I will do everything I can to make sure we get that money from central government.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, my other point on this was, and I think that the answer is going to be that no, there isn't going to be, but it was whether there was any significant slippage or failure to meet the deadlines. But what I'm gathering is that we're well on course for completing this.
The answer to that is there is a national shortage of labour that extends right way through subcontractors and supply chain, so it is more challenging. Our programme is very, very tight. The original intention is to complete by March 2023. Obviously that's quite a long time away, so a lot of things could change before then. But if eventuality takes place that there really are more reductions or less availability of people to do work, we can prioritise our work to make sure we're carrying it out on the main elements of the road. Then there's other ancillary works which can be completed after 2023, and the DFT have already opened the door to say that the funding can be extended beyond then.
Okay, thank you. My next point is, and for the officers and for the portfolio holder, is that as you are aware, I think you're aware that obviously being a local ward member and to see what was being done on Lye Road and Wimborne Road West, it faced a terrific amount of criticism within social media. There was an absolute deluge of criticism of Dorset Council in social media, that it was a waste of taxpayers' money. The general public didn't understand that this was government funded. It wasn't their local council tax paying that was paying for it. It was money that had come down from Westminster. And I just think as this programme rolls on, we need to do a lot more work around comms to get those messages out, because it was at times pretty hostile on social media towards Dorset Council, with all the usual. I just we could have an insurance that that type of work is going to be done through comms, and we're going to get that message out far more clearly.
Yeah, if I can pick up on that one, because at the board meeting yesterday we discussed future comms, and you're absolutely right, Shane. It's imperative that we get this across as a good news message now. When we first started the development work in Lye Road, people didn't understand what we were trying to achieve. Once we've completed it, it's my intention to use our own comms team as well as the TCF comms team to make sure we get local messages out, just highlighting all the advantages that have been provided. These are good quality cycleways. I took quite a lot of flack personally over the Lye Road, but that's unfortunately is part of our function in life. Until people understand what we're doing in full, there will always be people that will probably point the finger a little bit at you and ask questions. I think it's important to say at this stage, the support I received from the local members during this has been of great assistance to me and to the team. I know Wayne, when he's been having his discussions, has found it very helpful with the members' input. We can't always provide what you want, but several of the amendments that were made on Lye Road were because of points raised by you as local members, and I thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Bryan. Yeah, and I would say, speaking on behalf of the other local members, that we were very appreciative of the updates and being kept informed by the officers. Thank you. I've got David Shortell to speak next. Councillor Shortell.
Thank you, Chairman. Is it my understanding that as each section of the cycleway is open, so will be provided the barrel bikes for non-cycle owners to actually take the advantage of the new facilities?
Mr. Wiltshire.
Yeah, happy to come back on that one. Sorry, I saw that Councillor Bryan might be about to talk. I won't talk over my boss.
I'll invite him afterwards.
We're a team, Jack. You carry on.
Yeah, so to answer the question, we're not waiting for the completion of each element of each scheme to release the barrel bite scheme. Obviously, the barrel bite scheme already operates in BCP. We've now got the contract all ready to go for the barrel bite scheme to operate within Dorset Council's area, but within a specific, I think they call it geofence, but basically up towards Wimborne. So we'll get the barrel bite scheme in place as soon as we can, and the bikes can be ridden on the cycleways or they can be ridden in the road. Obviously, we prefer to have that full joined up system, but what we don't want to do is delay putting something in place for people who would prefer to hire a bike rather than own a bike, or don't have the option or storage space to own a bike. We don't want to exclude them from that opportunity, so we're trying to get that in place as soon as we can.
If I could just add, it just shows the importance. Sorry, Chairman, I should have waited for you to give me permission to speak. I apologise. But as you probably gathered, I'm quite enthusiastic on this. I took a long look at barrel bikes and to try and understand the advantages. But I've been sold on the basis that if you live in Wimborne but work in Ferndown, you'll be able to get on a bike in Wimborne, cycle to Ferndown, go to your work, leave the bike there, and then pick a bike up later on to get back to Wimborne. This again is a great way of increasing local movement of people to and from work. The barrel bikes will be introduced in Ferndown and Wimborne originally, but I have a commitment from barrel bikes that we will be introducing them in other places as the cycleways become available.
Thank you, Councillor Bryan. And I do note your enthusiasm, and I look forward to seeing you on a barrel bike in the future.
Jack has the video, which I'm making sure he doesn't release, let me tell you.
That goes to all of us, Chairman.
Councillor
That was on a barrel scooter, let me tell you.
Councillor Shortell, are you happy with that?
Yes, Chairman, thank you for that answer. That's reassuring.
Thank you. At 2.4 on page 70, where we mentioned the barrel bikes, Mr. Wiltshire, you've got it down as being the barrel bike scheme coming into Ferndown and Wimborne. Could I just ask, does that include Coal Hill? Because as you appreciate from the geography of the area, Coal Hill sits between Ferndown and Wimborne and abuts right up to Wimborne, and that would be of huge benefit, I would imagine, to the Coal Hill residents to use those barrel bikes to get down into Wimborne.
Yes, Chair, my understanding is that it does extend to Coal Hill. We can provide the exact fencing for it if required, and obviously, as Councillor Bryan said, we want to extend it further as well in the future. So, if it doesn't go to the elements of Coal Hill that you want to currently, hopefully that's something we could do in the future.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Took to speak.
Just very briefly, and Councillor Bryan mentioned it in passing a moment ago. As well as bikes, the scheme in Bournemouth, as I understand it, includes electric scooters, which my daughter has used and was very keen on. But will this scheme, as well as Beryl bikes, will it include these electric scooters?
Happy to come back on that, Chair.
Certainly.
The electric scooter scheme is only available for trial areas at the moment, so there's only specific parts of the country that can do that. Dorset Council was not part of that trial, so although I think there's an awful lot of benefits to be able to share the scheme with BCP, we're not allowed to have that come across the Dorset border. However, I have looked into that, but it doesn't automatically put the brakes on as you get to the border. It does gently slow you down.
Okay, so you're not going over the handlebars. Okay, that's a shame, because I think from reports I've heard of people that have used it, they are extremely useful, especially for those who are not necessarily wanting to cycle for exercise or exhaust themselves cycling, but just simply to be rather more quick and rapid than walking. But thank you for the answer.
Yep. Chair, can I just come back on that point?
Certainly.
Yes, and we'll see how the DFT trials go nationally, whether or not we have those sorts of scooter systems in Dorset. I think we probably need to come back to various committees here in first instance. But I certainly recognise that not everybody wants to use pedal power to power a bike. But we are looking under the new Beryl bike scheme to also have some electric bikes available. So that should also cover the same points that you're looking at there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Took. Okay, members. Sort of in the debate stage, is there any member that wishes to say anything else? No. Okay. So we've got a recommendation that the committee notes the progress that has been made on the Significant Transforming Cities Fund programme. Could I have a proposer to that recommendation, the seconder, please?
I'm happy to propose, Chairman.
Or second, whoever gets in first.
Okay. Councillor Shortell proposed, Councillor Took to second, thank you. So I think it's just my...
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. So this is just a my decision to note. Ms Watson, I presume I don't actually need to go to an officer, do I?
No, Chair, I mean, obviously the nature is just that you've noted and the summary of your points will be contained within the minutes.
Thank you. Okay, members, so if we move on to agenda item 9, Corporate Complaints Team Annual Report 2020 to 21. The recommendation is that the committee scrutinises and notes the annual complaints report for 2020-21. And I believe presenting is Mr. Anthony Bygrave.
Yeah, that's right, Chair. Afternoon, Chair, councillors and members. I'm Anthony Bygrave, responsible for the complaints function. So hopefully you've had an opportunity to scrutinise the report. It's very much in our sort of hindsight now, when we go back in the life of Dorset Council's complaints team and the trends of complaints. We were sort of 9 months further down the line now. So it's a little bit of a history lesson. But it does remind us of just what a challenging year 2021 was, not just for the complaints function, but anybody in the front line dealing with complaints, whether that's receiving them, being asked to respond to, investigate, and ultimately learn from complaints. And 2021, I think, was at times beyond a challenge in terms of the numbers and the intensity of the complaints. I think probably the key highlight figure is the 76% increase year on year, which I think at the time we felt was probably COVID related, because people had found themselves with more time on their hands. People have probably had an opportunity, maybe through working from home or spending more time at home, to actually see services that Dorset Council provided that maybe they were oblivious to. And I think also mankind's intolerance of mankind started to creep in, and we saw quite a lot of complaints where, again, perhaps activities of neighbours or planning applications that upset people, and we saw quite a wide range of complaints, and it's a significant increase. Looking at the Q3 figures for this year, I can say that things haven't really changed. So as we look back on 2021, I think the expectation that this was just purely COVID would probably be naive, because we're still experiencing high volumes of complaints. We're about 70% up on the pre-COVID times for Q3. So the culture of complaining hasn't declined purely because of the impacts of COVID. So that's probably just an observation, because my head's very much more in Q3 at the moment than perhaps this historic report. So, yep, massive increase. I think we also need to concentrate on the massive increase in compliments. I really think that, particularly in Q1 and Q2, when the response to COVID was underway, I think that the public sentiments towards Dorset Council were really, really positive. And rightly so, because I think the service we provided across the directorates, but particularly in relation to COVID, was fantastic. And people did start to recognise that in the early days of COVID. Then gradually, I think the scrutiny of services came more in, and but whilst we reflect on a massive increase in complaints, I think we need to also reflect on a massive increase in compliments and the job well done, particularly in and around some of the services in place. And to John Selgren's area, we were seeing quite a lot of sort of positive and supporting comments, which was massively heartening and a shot in the arm. And the compliments are still coming rolling in, and long may that be the case. Other key highlights: the learning from complaints, I think, probably suffered a little bit. We were doing really well as a corporate team in stimulating reflection and learning, but at a time when I think we were challenged both in terms of numbers and conflicting sort of priorities. I think sometimes that self-assessment of the service we provided might not have been delivered in quite the way we'd expect. We're working really hard this year to make sure that that improves. We were able to recruit another position because quite clearly it wasn't tenable to deliver the service to the level that we'd had done in previous years with the numbers of staff we had. So I'm pleased to say we were able to remedy that, and the focus is now very much back on learning from complaints and a little bit of polite challenge to see if we can be doing things better. One of the things we've done this year, which isn't captured in this particular report, is review our complaints policy itself, because in 2021 there was a review process for a lot of the complaint responses. So we were, in essence, doing a lot of these things twice. So the message really for this year, I think, is the councillors and members agreed in July that a single stage process would be a lot more helpful, both for senior managers, for the complaints team, and for the general public, because a lot of the time they have got a point. A lot of the time the complaints process can facilitate sort of positive outcomes, but sometimes the Ombudsman does need to be called upon for their independent eye. So the single stage process this year does enable that a little bit more smoothly. So timescales, I think, was probably the big elephant in the room for 2021, and I'm sure councillors and members would appreciate that dealing with some of the low-level complaints, which perhaps may not have been the priority at the time, maybe that wasn't the key focus. I mean, that there are statutory processes for complaints for social care. So there were occasions in 2021 too, in fact, where the service was suspended altogether. So if you've got a stockpile of complaints coming in at a tremendous rate, 76% more than the previous year, but the service has been redeployed elsewhere to assist frontline services, which I think is right and proper, you still have a stockpile. So the timescales isn't a reflection on the services, it's not a reflection in the directorates. I think it's a reflection that there wasn't a complaints team at time. And we were actually overdue by the time we got complaints to the managers to look at it, and it was a very, very challenging time. And I think I'm really pleased that Dorset Council have responded by investing in the team, in demonstrating that we are listening, and we are genuinely interested in listening to the public sentiment, and closing the doors to that service, I think sends out the wrong message. So I'm very, very pleased that this is confined to history. And as I look back with a shudder on 2021, I know that 9 months down the line, the service we're producing is a lot more robust. It's a lot more based on learnings and actions from complaints. And the single stage process hasn't resulted in any additional reputational damage or maladministration from the LGO. And in fact, Dorset Council should be very proud of the volume of complaints we've handled and resolved without the need for the LGO to represent complainants. And again, hopefully councillors and members will be heartened by the figures in relation to maladministration, very, very low when you consider the number of complaints we've dealt with. Okay, I've probably rambled, and I apologise if I have, but very interested in hearing any queries or observations on the report, and I'll do my best to respond.
That's good. It was good to hear your update on that, Mr. Bygrave. Thank you for that. And I think we all share the view that 2020-21, the sooner we put it back to a distant memory, the better. I've got a couple of non-committee members who wish to speak. I've got Councillor Carol Jones first.
Thank you, Chair. Just two things, if I may. Well, actually three, because I'd actually like to say, Anthony, I wouldn't like your job. Well done. Well done. Don't leave, ever. I just wondered whether you would classify several complaints from one complainant as several complaints or just one. That was one, and I just wonder where you are, and can I push you please for a spot list, because there are just certain things I'd just really like to look at. I know you were looking at doing that, but it would really be helpful to see your spot list. Thank you.
Of course. No, you raised two really, really good points. And I suspect we're moving towards a conversation on vexatious complainants, and I'm very nervous that there's a perception that there's a naughty list at Dorset Council. What we do have is a number of complainants that are quite vocal, and a lot of the time they have a point. And I'm really would impress upon everybody that deals with complaints is to always try to keep that independent eye, irrespective of the familiarity of some of the context. But if it's a complaint that has already gone through the corporate process and has been referred to the Ombudsman and has come to a decision, we won't reinvestigate it at local level. So the complaints team, part of the triage is to see, have we had this complaint before from the individual? And if it's not, and if it's a different side of the same coin, sometimes we can have a conversation about whether or not it's an effort to re-oxygenate a complaint that's already been considered. But we need to be really careful to cherry pick out anything that's new and that hasn't been considered through the complaints process, and again make sure that has a complete and full final position from the local authority. And the complaints team, as an assurance function, I think are really good, and I speak on behalf of the team rather than me, but I think the people that are working with the complaints are really thorough and will always provide a little bit of polite challenge if we think, well, hang on a second, there's a bit more work to do on this. So yep, we will, if we've considered it through the process, it will count as an individual complaint number, even if it's from somebody we've heard from before. The sync point of contact list, absolutely. I think councillors have got access to a more sort of light user version. I think it's right and proper that there isn't very much information, but there are a number of people, for a variety of reasons, that we have a single point of contact arrangement in place. And if you've not got access to that, I can make sure that that happens, particularly if it's somebody that's active in your ward. You should absolutely know about that. And on that note, I suspect that your inboxes are as challenged as the corporate complaints teams have been, and I suspect that a lot of those names are familiar to you as they are to us. And earlier on, when I was listening into the information compliance section with Mark Eyre, he quite rightly identified that, you know, the FOI, although the benchmark is higher for information compliance, we are still dealing with the same people, and it is easy to see how one can oxygenate a culture of complaining through FOI. But difficult to manage, and I think from the complaints process point of view, we need to be clear that we're not going to reinvestigate it at local level if it's something we've already heard from that particular person. But playing devil's advocate, even if people voice their views in the wrong way, or in a combative way, or in a vexatious way, I think we've still got a duty, particularly in the complaints team, to take a little bit of a step back and think, well, have they got a point here? And those behaviours are usually based on some foundation, or at least they think there's a foundation that we need to explain otherwise, if that is indeed the case.
Thank you. I think perhaps with some complaints where they are ongoing with particular people, it would be really helpful to have a slightly closer contact with officers dealing with it, because some people can play one off against the other, and it just can become quite difficult. And I don't have access to the SPOC. I haven't seen it, so if you could send it to me. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
My pleasure. There's it's a system that sits in SharePoint, so it's a Dorset Council piece of software, so we can certainly make that available.
Thank you. My next speaker is Councillor Fry.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, an interesting report, which is very good, and I know how hard and how good Dorset Council staff work, but complaints are a really good opportunity to learn what we could do better. Do we have a lessons learned plan, and the particular points out of that? And it also concerns me, the number of complaints going up, number of formal complaints from 358 to 644 and so on. Is there a COVID element into that?
I think if you'd asked me at the time, I would have said yes, there was, and I think senior leaders felt that it may be a COVID response when we sort of pitched for additional resources, and it soon became apparent this year as the quarters have unfolded that the trend of the complaint numbers being high compared to pre-COVID times it continues. It's still a very, as I mentioned earlier, it was 70% up Q3 year on year. Well, if we compare this year to pre-COVID, so that trend of complaining hasn't changed. I'm heartened that people feel that their voice is being listened to, and I'm heartened that the channels into Dorset Council are transparent, and it's a well-beaten path. And I'd rather get the feedback and be in a position to stimulate learnings from the local authority, and we're in a much better position to do that now that the resource issue has been addressed in the team. So yes, in terms of learning, absolutely. If we're not learning, I don't know why we would do it. We really do need to be listening, having a self-assessment of the service we provide, not just in the directorates, but from the complaints team as an assurance function as well. So we're closing the loop more with locality managers. We have a presence at senior meetings. It's not just an annual report that we reflect on 9 months later. We're very much more proactive than that. We report quarterly. We sit in to make sure that the key messages are getting back to senior staff. If we identify a trend from the get-go, we press the button, so to speak, to make sure that, we don't want to look back with interest many months later. We want to affect change and affect attention to trends at the earliest possible opportunity. So if there is something fundamentally or systemically wrong, we can perhaps address that. So yeah, as I say, I think learnings is key, not just learning the lessons, but actually demonstrating the actions. I think that we need to do more than just pay lip service to the notion of being a learning authority. I think we probably need to put our money where our mouth is and demonstrate through action plans and through outcomes that the lessons have been learned, and they stay learned through the many changes that can happen in the local authority and staffing restructures. It's easy to unlearn things which have already been learned. So again, I think there's still work very much to be done in terms of local authority learning.
Thank you for that answer. How do you communicate the lessons learnt out to staff and to councillors? Because many of the work that we do in our wards, will often be around complaints or service, whatever. And those lessons learnt might be useful in us resolving issues with our constituents and also being aware of what's going on within the council.
Yeah, really good point. I think we're very good at feeding back to the directorates, and I don't think we're so good at the corporate complaints team updating councillors as to particularly some of the activities going on in the ward, so that you've got the assurance that that those lessons are being learned. So there is certainly more work we could be doing there, and I think in terms of, we mentioned the unreasonable complainants, which tend to make us work more closely together. I think there is an opportunity to take councillors with us on the complaints journey more, so that you've got assurances, and also we limit the chance of duplicating and perhaps you feeling that you need to become involved in a corporate complaint matter, which is already quite well known to the council and may have been dealt with already. So I think there's more work we can do to assure you that matters are in hand.
Thank you for that update, Chair. If I could ask you perhaps to consider that as some form of action for us to update councillors in the future.
Certainly. Ms Watson, did you make a note of that?
Yes, Chair, I did.
Thank you, Chair. I'll leave you to it now. Thank you.
I think if I can add to that, Chair, I think I mean the content of the quarterly report will include learning points, but some of them are quite sensitive and specific, and particularly around sort of children's social care matters. So I think we probably need to have a think about exactly how, the look and feel of what we share. But absolutely think you should feel assured that the lessons are being learned. So
thank you. I think the points can be sanitised right down in quite a long way, so you just get the general flavour of what the issue is. But thank you, you've answered my question.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Flower, speak next.
Chairman, very interesting debate around complaints, and thank you very much, Anthony, for your report. Well, I just had a quick look at it, and we shouldn't lose sight of the fact we get compliments as well. And I noticed the compliments in the last year have gone up by 112%. So whilst we have, of course, we have to be conscious of the complaints and how we deal with them and how we improve if there are issues around our service delivery, we deal with them. But let's not lose sight, it's a two-way street. And we do get, and we have had, quite a significant increase in compliments made to the council for the services we deliver. Thank you, Chairman. Just a point of balance, really.
No, I was going to pick up on it later on, Councillor Flower, as it hadn't escaped me. If I could now move to Councillor Roberts. Oh, I beg your pardon, Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes.
Councillor Roberts, just before you speak, I've just seen I got an RTS from Mr. Mayor. If I could bring him in first, please.
Of course.
Chairman, I'm happy to wait until the end. Thank you. It wasn't a monitoring officer point; it's a point as director for the area in question. Thanks.
Okay. So, Councillor Roberts.
Yes. Thanks for the excellent explanation of the complaints. Could I possibly, as this is the place overview, have possibly a little more of a breakdown, if you've got it to hand, of the complaints to the place directorate? We've got 346 formal and 336 informal, but an extraordinarily good number of compliments of 364. I was wondering how many of those formal and informal are related to planning, and how many to potholes, and how many are much more general, because obviously as a ward member, planning and potholes are two of the most frequently raised topics at my 6 parish councils.
Okay, yes, I'm more than happy to pick that point up. The quarterly reports that we produce for the directorates go into more detail as to what areas these complaints come from, or pointed towards rather. I've recently attended an ombudsman webinar where they sort of discussed trends across England. And other than Dorset, children's social care were the hot topics, and in Dorset it's planning. And I think part of the increase in complaints, as I mentioned at the beginning of my explanation, is services that people can see, and that is largely place services. I mean, the good work that was being done with social care, people don't necessarily see that on their doorstep, but what they do see is what their neighbour might be doing, or a planning application on the doorstep on a light somewhere, or they might see that their drive is blocked more frequently by a delivery vehicle, and it became very much more about services that people can see. So potholes, no, we don't take many formal complaints about potholes. They're reported and they're dealt with, and they're not necessarily complaints, they're service requests. So I know that that's sometimes a grey area, but if it's a pothole being reported, the online journey for that for people to report is really good, and that works. And I think it would only become a formal complaint if somebody felt that they'd raised that point many times and there's no visible action in response to it, and I think that would be reasonable. Or if there's been an action promised and it's not been delivered, I think that would be reasonable as a formal complaint. But actually the reporting of it, the function online is really good, so we don't see many complaints per se about potholes. But planning, yes, we do. And it's not always the right place, because there is a statutory process for considering planning applications, and Dorset Council's complaints process for considering this is non-statutory, and we need to be quite careful that we're not trying to influence the statutory process by becoming embroiled in a complaint. So we've got a lot better this year at recognising what is a planning complaint and what isn't, and what actually needs to sit through a different process, or indeed something that needs to be considered through judicial review. But it doesn't stop people filling in the online form, and in their mind they've made a formal complaint. How Dorset Council deal with it may be a different thing. We need to communicate that and make sure that that's clear. But yeah, in terms of volume, yeah, a lot of it was around services that people could see, and that would include planning, and it would be including noise, neighbour conduct, that kind of thing, where people were a lot more sensitised to what was going on in and around them, possibly because their life at that point wasn't as enriched as it normally would be, and some of the smaller things may have become bigger things because of the circumstances at the time.
Thank you. If I could clarify, I think on the pothole side, certainly they've been raised with me where perhaps a repair hasn't been actioned, or people have had damage to vehicles and have not been satisfied with the response. I don't know if that's common, or whether that's quite an unusual. And I suppose the other thing, perhaps you comment, which I didn't touch on, I meant to, was waste services, and I imagine you may get a few complaints about that.
Yeah, absolutely. More than happy to cover those off. And I'd imagine your experience may be through your own inboxes and what may have taken up an inordinate amount of councillor time in your considerations. And it might be that perhaps the voice of people that have had damage to their cars ring quite loudly with you. But through the complaints process, we don't get a tremendous amount of claims being rebooted to another process, and we've got a fit for purpose insurance team that consider claims against the local authority. If people don't like the outcome of the claim, I don't think it's a question of then considering it through another process unless something's been missed. And I think the complaints team can have a look to see if the process has been carried out reasonably, or if the subsequent repair to the roads happened. But I don't think you just go process to process until you find one that gives you the answer you want. And if a claim's been turned down by the insurance team, we would expect that they would then seek legal advice to progress it rather than come to me. That said, there's a role for the complaints team if the remedial work hasn't been carried out or something like that. I think there's possibly more work again to be done with insurance, to my mind, because you can learn from a claim in the same way as you can learn from a complaint. as a learning authority, I think, you know, those lessons learned, that there is a commonality to what Dave Watson and his team will be doing to what I'm doing.
Thank you.
And does that answer the question? I think the other thing you mentioned was waste, wasn't it? And what we're seeing from waste is a tremendous amount of poor behaviour, and the complaints team were involved more so, not so much in numbers, but in helping frontline staff manage some of the behaviours, because there has been a genuine wellbeing issue for Dorset Council over COVID, and some of the behaviours haven't been acceptable. So we've been very involved with waste in terms of addressing complaints that may be complaints and need resolution. We've also worked quite hard on preparing a better and smoother way of managing customer concerns, so that we're getting the message out more clearly first time, rather than perhaps spending an inordinate amount of time trying to get those messages across, but without actually completing a process. So I think the complaints process can help with that and get that consistent message out to people. But we've also been here just to make sure that people have been reasonable in the way that they deal with Dorset Council staff. And waste springs to mind because I know that, again, it's a visible service, and I think some of the scrutiny and the vexatious behaviour ring true, particularly for waste. And I'm really pleased to report, you know, some of the support we've had from local councillors, particularly Councillor Miller, in terms of just how visible that they're prepared to be in support of Dorset Council staff wellbeing. So thank you ever so much for that.
Thank you for a very comprehensive response. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. My next speaker is Councillor Andrews, and I know you've got a press and engagement you need to go on to, Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I'm very interested in the place numbers as well. Just to say that I think councillors have done a fantastic job fending off complaints in the last year. I know certainly my mailbox was full of people wanting to complain about searches, but when I'd given them the facts and the figures that were so ably provided by the monitoring officer, even David Walsh, even though it wasn't his portfolio and older, were great, that I could actually give people an answer which they seem to be satisfied with. So as similarly with my knowledge on highways, etc., I was able to fend off a lot of complaints and get things sorted. But so I think the councillors have done an amazing job this year. People have been more sensitive to stuff going on in their areas. You mentioned noise. I've had somebody wanted to make a dual carriageway a 30-mile-an-hour limit and things like that. You know, it's but never got the complaint stage, because you talk to these people, don't you? But my first answer, who do I complain to? I said, well, what's it all about, before you go and complaining to somebody. So just to point that out, there's been a lot of proactive work in stopping complaints coming by the councillors and all around members all around the county. So just thought I'd make that point.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Andrews.
Can I echo my thoughts on that as well? Absolutely. I've worked a lot more closely with the local councillors in the last 2 years than I had in my previous years at the Dorset Council, and really welcome their support. Absolutely no doubt at all that they are successful in diffusing some of the complaints, but equally the complaints team are here and we're fit for purpose, and we're here to support you too. So if you feel that your inboxes are becoming difficult to manage, feel free to reach out to us, because we've got quite a lot of experience in dealing with unreasonable people when they've become unreasonable, but without losing sight that there might be a service which we need to have a closer look at. So don't be afraid to point people in our direction too.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. Appreciate that.
Thanks.
Thank you. I got Councillor Shortell next.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, and hello, Anthony. We've been in contact quite a bit just recently, I know. In your email you sent to me the other day, in relation to a particular professional complainant who sends vexatious emails regularly, you mentioned that, in fact, if he continues to keep on changing his email address to avoid the single point of contact restrictions, further action would be taken. At what point would that further action be taken? How far does he need to go in order for us to take it to legal, if you see what I mean?
It's a really good point, and I'd like to cover that off. We've got an HR policy which covers violence, aggression and harassment at work, and there's an unreasonable behaviours protocol which I tend to be working more closely with, which just deal with people that possibly need a little bit of help in voicing their opinions, or being managed to a point where we can conclude something, or in a genuine effort to help get to the bottom of things, which is always my first effort. I never lose sight of the fact that these behaviours are sometimes based on an acorn of fact or truth. But yeah, we have an unreasonable behaviours panel now, which meet once a month. So it's not just, although very much the poster boy for the project, it's not just me alone that has a consideration for this. So we have a representation from customer services and HR. And if we feel as a panel in a consistent approach that behaviours are straying into harassment territory, and the changing, knowingly changing the terms of the SPOC in an effort to bypass it, I think we probably are going into vexatious and harassment territory, then there would be an invitation to invite somebody from legal to have that conversation as well, just to see at what point we need to go a little bit further. And it's very, very much the exception. And as I said earlier on, I really want to get away from this notion that there's a naughty list at Dorset Council. There isn't. There's a dedication to try and manage people's concerns as transparently and fairly as possible. But there are times, for a variety of reasons, where the impact on Dorset Council's wellbeing for their staff, who are here to deliver services, sometimes the behaviours become unreasonable. So that's why that protocol's there, and I'd like to offer all councillors and members the assurance that so far the panel meetings have been really successful, very measured, and I think we all want the best for Dorset Council staff and councillors when we're dealing with matters of poor behaviour against local authority. Does that answer your query? I've worried that I was straying off topic really, but it's something I'm very, very passionate about. As the complaints deal largely with a lot of negative sentiment, sometimes that's not been portrayed to us in a reasonable manner, so we work very closely with the unreasonable behaviours protocol, and I know that local councillors have been touched by the same people, the same volume, the same tenacity, and it can be very difficult to manage. I have the support of my team, my manager, and ultimately the monitoring officer, and I find that's a tremendous comfort. The local councillor may feel quite a lonely inbox. So again, the complaints team are here to help and lend an ear and support, and we might have some experience that we can share with you.
If it were just the local councillors, that would be more not acceptable, but tolerable. But unfortunately, certain individuals are getting the town and parish councillors involved as well, and are targeting them. So much so that, in fact, perhaps a local town clerk has got the police involved and got the police to visit certain individuals. And that's the reason why I asked the question: how far does a complainant, repetitive complainant, need to go before perhaps the police get involved?
Yeah, no, it is a really good question, and it is a grey area, isn't it? And I think sometimes we need to consider under the individual set of circumstances, whether there's any underlying health issues with the individual. So this is why there is a panel, and I think it's important that there is, so that we have a consistent approach. And if a management, whether that's a single point of contact, but if there's a management plan in place to try and help deliver a more consistent service to an individual, I think it's really important that we do monitor that. And if that's being deliberately bypassed, again, I think we'd need to to warn accordingly. And I don't think it's. I think what I'm trying to say is it's very, very much the exception that we would go to the point where we feel we need to sort of send a cease and desist letter to somebody. I think we'd want to feel assured that we've not missed the point in all the noise, and there's something there that we can actually address and resolve. And in my experience so far, underneath the noise, there's usually been a point, and it's taken some digging. But the reason, I don't know what the population of Dorset is at the moment, but when you consider the number of people on our single point of contact list, it's extraordinarily low. Doesn't undermine the impacts they can have on individuals, but more often than not, we try and resolve the issue rather than resort to cease and desist. It's very much the exception that we say, you know, we're going to stop now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Shortell. I've got Councillor Took to speak next.
Thanks, Chair. Just looking at the way the figures move around, we've got a fairly similar picture to the one that we saw earlier on this morning when we were looking at the figures for assurance with Mr. Eyre. I understand that, and a similar pattern, because we've got complaints rising from, so for example, 23 to 120 next quarter. And then we start to see timescales of overdue start to rise and track the numbers. Clearly understandable. More complaints, the more time they require, and the more work needs to be done, and we'll get slippage in response times. But what we were told this morning was that there were third-party contractors that could be brought in by Mark Eyre, ad hoc or under various provisions, in order to try and cover some of the excess of work. Is there a similar procedure in place within complaints?
Complaints, as recently as 4 months ago, recruited an additional person to the team to react to the increase in complaints. As this year was unfolding, it became clear that it wasn't purely just a COVID response that was the reason that the complaints numbers were increasing. The timescales, as I mentioned earlier, I think there were two. Well, I know there were 2 times during the year of 2021 where the service was suspended and frontline and the staff were redeployed to assist the frontline effort. So there was a bit of a stockpile building. So in some cases we weren't actually able, when we returned to our day jobs, if you like, some of those complaints were already overdue before they'd got to a manager. In terms of outsourcing, I feel that looking at this year, the service is fit for purpose in stimulating learnings and actions from complaints, which is proportionate to the number of complaints we're getting into our inbox. 2021 is unprecedented, and I think when you look at Q1, you'll see that the complaint numbers were fairly low because most people had bigger fish to fry when COVID first hit, and the number of compliments for Q1 were really high because I think people felt really positive about what they were seeing from Dorset Council in what was an unprecedented operational period. But then as we go into Q2, 3 and 4, I think people's lives were started to be impacted a little bit more, and that those good things that stimulate and enrich one's life were being denied them, and I think that's why our complaints inboxes were so busy. So there's no doubt that the work that Mark Eyre was doing with information compliance overlaps with the complaints process. That's why both services sit under Mark, and that's why we're looking to use the similar software so that there's a bit more of a uniformed approach. But yeah, we are seeing that sometimes the information requests can generate complaints. So there's no doubt there's a trend there.
Okay, but in terms of outsourcing with the relief pressure, which is generally a cheaper option when it's short term than taking on a full-time member of staff, which is a permanent decision. So the question is still, is that something that you're able to do with complaints?
In terms of, I mean, the short answer is it's not been explored. My concern is we're looking at a report from 9 months ago. The operational circumstances at the moment are very different. We're 9 months down the line in the life of Dorset Council, and the corporate team are back to, rather than it being a firefighting expedition, it's very much more now a service as an assurance function which generates organisational learnings and actions from complaints. And I would hope that Dorset Council wouldn't want to lose a handle on that, which there would be a danger, in my opinion, in outsourcing and depersonalising it. We're taking tremendous strides across the directorates for having a consistent approach to complaints management and a positive approach to the culture of complaining. If you're outsourcing that, I think that sends the wrong message, personally.
Yeah, I think the question is really about in times of need, when there is pressure on the service, is it possible? But I'll rest it there as just having just brought it to the meeting, as it were, and for potential consideration in the future. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Took. Before Mr. Eyre makes comment on that, could I just ask for a proposer and a seconder for us to continue the meeting? We're coming to the 3-hour deadline, so I need a suspension of standing orders in order to be able to continue the meeting, because we're very close to the end of it. So could I have a proposer and a seconder to continue the meeting, please?
I would like to propose to extend the meeting beyond the 3-hour limit, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Shortell. Thank you, Councillor Took. All in favour? If I hear no response, I take that as no dissent. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I just really wanted to pick up a little bit on Councillor Took's comment. And I think probably the real difference between the outsourcing arrangement that we've got for the subject access requests is it's to do a very specific role. So it's around taking documentation, redacting sensitive information. Whereas I think when you start getting into the complaints sort of side of it, a lot of the work needs to be done with that internal knowledge. So certainly if we were in the position where we had significant workloads that the team can deal with from an administrative perspective, additional support could be brought in, but it's probably limited to that. So it's just that little bit of clarification, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Took. Okay, I've got Councillor Taylor has requested to speak. This is outside of the committee members, but I'll allow it on this occasion. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you. I'm just looking at a broad cross approach on this report, which to me is absolutely fantastic. And I'm glad to say that some observations today was the fact is that the joining up of officers and councils is happening more and more, because I can see as a council that we are working hand in hand now, and we are engaged with the public even more, and it is being noticed. I just want to make sure, and I'm emphasising the words from earlier, that we are jointly inclusive. And can that be pointed, please, again? Thank you.
Thank you. Did you wish to make any comment to that, Mr. Blackgrove? I don't
absolutely echo the sentiments. I've really enjoyed the closer working relationship with local councillors. We're here for the same purpose, and absolutely, my door's certainly open to have further conversations.
Okay, thank you. I've got Mr. Mayor to speak next.
Yeah, Chairman, thank you very much. I usually pop up in your meetings as monitoring officer with some point of procedure or other, but I wanted to say something this morning as the director for the area that the complaints team sits in, and first of all, to thank the committee both for the scrutiny and for the positive feedback. I suspect that Tony isn't the only person on the call this morning. I suspect that the rest of the complaints team are looking in and hearing the comments from the committee, and that's been incredibly helpful. Thank you. But I also wanted to take the opportunity myself, Chairman, to thank Tony and the team, because I know the focus, Tony's personal focus, the team's focus is on learning from complaints. And when we've had these incredibly high volumes of complaints for such a long time, it's been difficult to have the focus on the learning. And instead, it's been the day-to-day grind of handling complaints and managing the sheer volume that has been dealt with. And I know that the team are really looking forward to getting back to a position where we've got the additional members of staff in post, we get the numbers under control and can actually focus on the bit that matters and makes the job worthwhile, which is actually learning from people's complaints. There's also been a lot of comments about the unreasonable complainants. They do have a disproportionate impact, but they are in the minority. So we will deal with those rigorously. We will make sure we learn from those as well, because very often we have people those who behave unreasonably. There will be something in there. There will be a kernel of truth to the complaint and something that we do need to follow through and learn from. But what we won't accept is people who behave unreasonably towards you as councillors and towards staff. So I hope you're reassured about them. But my opportunity, Chairman, and thank you for letting me, my opportunity to really thank the whole of the complaints team and to Tony for his personal commitment to learning from complaints.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just for following on from that, I notice in the report it's at 1. The amount of code of conduct complaints, 54, across 160 councils, 1,400 councillors, of which only 8 were investigated, and only 3 were upheld. And I think there's probably something there in a learning curve, or some additional learning for members across parish and town councils, across the authority and the Dorset Council, obviously. So that those code of conduct complaints aren't brought too quickly, because obviously it involves a lot of work for Dorset Council and for the officers to go through that, and to have only 8 that were actually investigated, only 3 upheld. It would appear that we're getting a lot of code of conducts coming through that really should never have occurred in the first place. And I think, as you alluded to earlier, Mr. Bygrave, that we've been in that unprecedented period where people are feeling a bit battered and bruised over the last 2 years because of what we've gone through, and maybe sensitivities are a bit close to the surface. And it may be that will actually settle as time goes on. But it does seem a high number, with, as I say, to have only 3 upheld at the end of that. It does seem sort of out of kilter, really.
I'd like to add that the corporate complaints team will be considering the councillor conduct through a consistent approach with the complaints across the directorates now. Jonathan Mayer, as monitoring officer, had previously considered councillor conduct complaints, but that's been delegated to myself and the complaints team from the 1st of January. So I look forward to becoming more involved with that and monitoring some of the trends that will doubtless and indeed already have started to show themselves in respect to complaints against councillors. But yeah, very low numbers, weren't they, in terms of those that were actually upheld?
Yeah, they were. Okay, members, is there any other comment from any member of the committee on the debating side of it, or are you all satisfied now? So I'm not hearing anything. Okay, so I think just to sum it up, without going through all the figures again and the numbers of complaints, but I think that considered the unprecedented time that we've been in, while the number of complaints have been high, I think Dorset Council has been proved to have performed extremely well through the period, because many of the complaints weren't upheld. In terms of the financial implications, while the costings were up on 2019-20, and I did check on 2019-20 as to whether that was a misprint because it was so low. And I appreciate the costings are up, but they are nowhere near the 2018-19 period. So hopefully we've been through that 2020-21. nightmare period for everyone concerned with COVID, with the implications that that's had. So hopefully things will settle down again and we'll return back to closer to the 2019-20 complaints and costings that we saw then. I'd just like to add my thanks to the complaints team on behalf of the Scrutiny Committee. You have an unenviable job in what you try to do and what you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And I know that the other members on this committee and across the chamber do share my concerns about the health and well-being of the officer staff that are continually having to deal with those complaints and managing your welfare in the job that you're doing. So can you please take away to your team how grateful we are for the work that you've done over an extremely difficult period. Thank you, Mr. Bygrove.
Thank you, Chair. I really appreciate your comments, and I will feed that back to the team.
Thank you. So, members, if I move on to the recommendation that the committee scrutinises notes the annual complaints report, I think we've given it a good scrutiny debate. So could I have a proposer and a seconder, please, for that recommendation?
I'll propose, Chairman. It's Mark.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts.
I second, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Shortell. Are you satisfied with that, Ms Watson? We don't need to go to a director, do we, for that?
No, Chairman, because it says to note the report.
Yep. So if I can now move on to the agenda item 10, Place and Resources Scrutiny Committee Forward Plan, and it's for members to note the items for the next meeting on the 8th of March. Okay.
Chairman, sorry, may I just comment? It does appear that every meeting we overrun.
If we,
yes. Should we consider that the agenda is perhaps a little too full? Because I, for one, I'm going to have to leave in 10 minutes, and there were items I really wanted to contribute to, and it does concern me that the agenda maybe is too full for us to consider the items properly within our normal allotted time. It's perhaps something for us to consider.
Yeah, your point is noted. Thank you, Councillor Roberts. So, trying to move on as quickly as I can. As I say, to note the items for the next meeting on the 8th of March. So if members are happy with that, I'll move on. And so it's to look at the performance dashboard review. Committee members to flag up any areas for potential review. So if I go to Operation Corporate first, Councillors Heatley and Councillors Shortell, is there anything on the performance dashboard that's causing you concern at the moment?
I don't think I have anything at this point.
I don't have anything either, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. If I move to Operational Place, Councillors Mark Roberts, David Took and John Andrews, is there anything on there that's causing you concern at the moment?
Well, if I kick off, because I've got to go, there were two red items on both major and minor, or principal and minor road. I guess that's repairs not being done in time, but also there was a red on the Ridor accident reports, and I wondered whether that was a matter of concern. That I don't think that's a regular occurrence. I suspect that it's just that one or two events happened in that period that needed reporting, but I don't know if any of those need a particular comment. They struck me as items that we probably ought to just review.
Okay, point's taken. So, Ms Watson, we'll have a conversation with Mr Bonner outside this meeting.
Could I add to that, Chair?
Yeah, I was just going to come to you, Councillor Took.
Thank you. I agree with Councillor Roberts. Those items struck me as well. So I very much take his point on those. I'd also like to add number of homes built, which is we appear to be failing our delivery test. And failing the delivery test on new houses built has severe consequences in planning terms, because we can then find ourselves on the wrong side of speculative applications. This is a particular bugbear of mine because, of course, the council doesn't actually control what developers build, but it's certainly a concern that we're not meeting the delivery test, and it's my concern is then what what could we possibly do about it? How could we encourage developers to actually build out where they've got planning permission granted?
Okay. Is that showing red on the dashboard?
It is.
Okay.
It's showing RAG is red and direction of travel is red.
Okay. Thank you for that. So we'll take that up as well. Ms. Watson.
Yeah, I've noted that.
Thank you. Okay. HR, unfortunately we don't have councillors Canning and Tritliff, unfortunately had to give their apologies today, so I will move on to agenda item 11 and the cabinet forward plan. So if there's any comment from any member of the cabinet forward plan and decisions of recent cabinet meetings on the 8th of November or the 7th of December. So any member have a comment they wish to make? If not, I will move on. Okay, so I'll move on to agenda item 12, urgent items, of which there are none. Moving on to agenda item 13, except business, and there is none. So you'd be pleased to hear, members, at 10 minutes past 1, I shall close the meeting.